Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We're live again today for our last stream here before the Acolyte starts next week. So we're going to talk about all of the latest news from the past week in Star Wars and then answer all of your questions, your comments, anything you want to talk about in the chat here between all the topics we discuss or anything else you come up with. This is a live Q&A, and it's your chance to ask us anything you want. So if you have a topic that's not even Star Wars related, send it into the chat. If you have a topic that's Star Wars adjacent, send it into the chat. We will talk about pretty much anything. So we're going to run for about an hour and a half until about 8:45-ish East Pacific. So make sure you join us for that entire time. Send in your chats. If you want to make sure you get in a chat at the top, send in a super chat. Helps to the top. We greatly appreciate any of the support. So if you'd like to make sure you get something up there, send it in to the chat. Okay, and without further ado, we do have a few topics here today, mostly related to the Acolyte, as this is, like I said a little bit earlier, the last stream we're going to be doing before it's officially Acolyte season, before we have 7 straight weeks of Acolyte live streams. And for those of you who might be worried about, oh, I enjoy this show, where is it going to stop completely during the Acolyte? No, it won't stop during the Acolyte. It's just going to turn into the Acolyte show. And luckily for us, it's going to be at the almost exact same time we're doing right now. Next week might be a little later because there's a 2-episode premiere. We're going to watch the episodes, then we're going to go live. So join us next week and keep an eye out for when the official start time will be for our streams. But we should be live next week around 7 to 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, depending on when the episodes drop. It'll be full spoiler streams, so obviously if you haven't watched the episodes, make sure you watch the episodes of The Acolyte before you go into the stream next week. But that's the only criteria. Join us. We'll talk about The Acolyte, but it will still be open to people asking questions about anything related to Star Wars. So if there's a big news topic, or if there's something that is really interesting that came out that we'd like to talk about, we might include it in the show. We might do a separate show if it's on a different day than Tuesday. But just know for the next 7 weeks, starting next week, Acolyte, 7 p.m. usually Pacific, we'll be live talking about the latest episodes, giving you guys our thoughts, talking about the predictions for the next week, and so on and so forth. Those of you who joined us for the Bad Batch and stuff like that, or maybe Ahsoka, will know kind of the format of the show. So that will be next week. Housekeeping out of the way. We did have a couple of videos come out this past week, including my first of the Old Republic timeline for my First of the Legends timeline series. Check that out if you're interested in how to read, watch, play everything Old Republic. The next episode should be coming out shortly. Also working on a video that will be about all the characters that could show up in the Acolyte. And do this series every time. There's a new show coming out. Did one for Ahsoka last, so hopefully you guys enjoy that video as well. But now into the topics today. Most of it is having to do with the Acolyte because the Acolyte just had its big Hollywood premiere with everybody going to watch the first 2 episodes. Some watched 4 episodes of the show, which would be about halfway through. And the reviews, pretty darn positive, overwhelmingly positive, some would say. Haven't really seen anybody with a negative word. Now, of course, we preface this by 2 things. One, when you're invited to a big Hollywood premiere, it's hard to be negative, right? It has to be bad, pretty bad to be negative, or you have to be somebody who goes all the time, right? Just the fan reactions, most likely they're going to be relatively positive. Second thing on the track record, they've only seen the first 2 to 4 episodes, so it doesn't really mean much because it's just the first couple episodes. And because most of us, or all of us, are going to get to see the first 2 episodes next Tuesday, we might join in on the excitement next Tuesday and the love of the first 2 episodes. Third thing is Disney Plus shows always start out pretty well. They usually always have really good first couple episodes. So I don't take too much from the excitement around the Acolyte so far. And I'm glad people aren't coming out and being like, these first 4 episodes suck. Like everybody's positive. So as long as it's positive, I'm happy. Sonic, what were your thoughts on kind of the general consensus coming out of the Acolyte premiere?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely a lot of people invited. I know that I think today or just yesterday was the UK premiere as well. So we're getting a little bit more of like a second round of people's positive reactions. And again, over this last week, it's been positive. It's not going to be something that I expect to ever be like super negative or wrong, because this has been an era that I think has had a lot to draw from already, right? This is not something that is like an entirely new thing. Even if the idea is new, the world, the setting, the characters, the influences, they're pretty well established, and if there is an era of Star Wars today that is fully fleshed out, it's definitely the prequel era. It's the one that has such rich storytelling and from so many different mediums. So I always expected the Acolyte now kind of being sandwiched in between what we've had with the High Republic Initiative and what we've had with the prequels. It was going to do fine. It was never going to be anything to like worry about. I will say that I've noticed that a lot of the discussion has been pretty positive, like, not just like, "Oh, it's good." It's like they're
Yeah.
pointing out some specific things with, like, the choreography, or just saying like, "Wow, this is, like, a really serious mystery story." Like, the action is better than anything they've been showing. Like, they've been using some language that, to me, does imply that there is a lot of excitement and surprise coming out of these 2 episodes or 4 episodes that people have gotten the chance to see. We know that there have been other YouTube channels like the Kyle Katarn channel and everyone else who's been invited, and I we have a lot of respect for them, and they've been very positive too. So we don't know what it's going to end up like. We ourselves might not absolutely love it, but I feel a lot of the same vibes that I felt when Andor kind of was going through this same press procedure, and people were like, "Oh my God, it's like Star Wars, like you've never seen it before." It's like gritty, serious, deep. Like they were using these words that I was looking for when in relation to the show, and yeah, I'm hearing only the right things so far for the Acolyte. I think the only thing I've heard like negative or mixed is that it's a bit slow to start off, and I'm not worried about that. But again, Disney Plus does 8 episode seasons, so sometimes you do, with the amount of seasons of Star Wars shows that we see now, kind of have to be a little like worried as like, okay, does that mean that the story only really gets going by episode 5 or 6? But I don't know. I'm pretty confident. I'm enjoying the vibes. I think a lot of like the online negativity has really started dissipating with the more the marketing material has come out a lot more of just what we're seeing out of the show. And I think I'm ready to just take it for what it is. If I love it, I love it. If I don't like it, I don't like it. If it's just another Star Wars show, it's just another Star Wars show. But yeah, otherwise, pretty excited. I do think there's a lot of love coming out of these press screenings and from the cast and crew. So I can't help but be excited.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I can't wait for the show. In general, we've both been pretty high on this as a concept, more so than a lot of the general fandom. And I think for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, I think this type of show fits perfectly in this time period as big High Republic fans. I think this is kind of what we need to transition us out of that. And so there's a lot of aspects of this that I'm quite excited for. Generally, though, I don't really pay attention to any type of first reactions. Like, how many times have we seen awful movies or awful shows have great first reactions? So, it's not something that I really care about, but I do appreciate that they did have a lot of people, like you were mentioning, YouTube creators or people who are more generally critical, like, watching this through a critical lens, not just fans who are invited or social media influencers who are invited just to be there and party, right? These are people who are going to talk about this show for a living. And I think I respect, that opinion a bit more than just the average Joe who's there, right? So I'm glad we're hearing positive things from those types of people, and then obviously critics will really get a full breakdown from critics when it comes out, and those people are generally more unbiased because this is their job to critique film and television. So I'm excited with what I hear, not really going to pay attention to too much of what people are saying or get my hopes up that this is the greatest thing ever until I see the show, at least the first 2 episodes. But but mostly the the entire show. But I'm glad nobody's saying this is bad. And there's not really any yeah buts like you were kind of mentioning, right? There's nobody going, oh, this is a super unique tone or really cool vibe, but it's not that interesting or but the characters kind of suck. Like there's none of that. No, everybody's pretty generally positive about the cast, the characters, the tone, the feel. The tone is definitely the thing I'm most excited for. I'm glad this is murder mystery Star Wars. Getting to read that first half of Out of the Shadow, or no, not Out of the Shadows, Trail of Shadows, when we read that comic book miniseries from Daniel Jose Older. That was something I never really realized I needed from Star Wars. That was a really cool murder mystery thriller tone to a Star Wars comic, and the way it was set up with the shading and the penciling, I thought was very very neat. So glad this is kind of going that route. I think it fits in the High Republic, fits in this time period, and we'll just have to see what the content of the show is before we make really any big generalizations, I guess, about its place in canon or its canonicity or how it handles this time period for the Sith and all that. But starting off strong for the Acolyte premiere, and only a week left, less than a week left at this point in time, to see the first two episodes ourselves. And we can't wait to talk to all of you about it. If you missed my spiel at the beginning, we will be back next week and every week of the Acolyte talking about each new episode as they drop. Show will probably be pushed back a little bit next week to maybe about 7:30ish Pacific. We'll let you know, I guess, depending on the time of the episodes when they drop. But yeah, we'll be back next week. Join us to talk about the latest episodes of the Acolyte. But we had even more Acolyte news come out this week as we really are ramping up full force into marketing. This is the final week to push this show before the first episode drops. And part of that was a group of character posters that did reveal little bits of information about all the main characters. So first, I'll read these off to everybody. We can send the link to or put it in our description at the end of the video if you guys want to check out the posters yourselves. But we start out with our main character. We presume to be our main character, May, who's played by Amanda Stenberg. This character is a mysterious young woman with a tragic past. May gets swept up into a sinister mystery, one that puts her into the center of a conflict in unexpected ways. She's determined to exact vengeance on those who wronged her, and little can stop May on her quest. So, a bit more about what is driving this character to what we think be the assassin of the Jedi, although there's probably some bait and switch there, as you see her say she didn't do it in the trailer. There's some things going on here with May, but seemingly set up to be one of our assassin characters. Then you have Master Soul, played by Lee Jung Jae, who Master Soul is a wise, highly respected Jedi Master, strong in the ways of the Force. Still and stalwart, Soul has a deep sense of compassion and will defend those who cannot defend themselves. He's a powerful warrior with intense emotions that he uses in his Jedi training to balance. So that's really interesting. I think, Sonic, I'll pass this one to you about Master Soul as well. The idea of emotions, right? That's a big part of High Republic Jedi is yeah, it's keeping it in check, not falling to the dark side, but still being in tune with your emotions, being in tune with who you are, being a bit more aware of your emotional side and how to quell that instead of just fully suppressing it like we see in the prequel era. And this idea of having a Jedi master who fully embraces his intense emotion, I think is very High Republic, and we'll see how that plays between Golden Age of High Republic like we've seen in phase 1, 2, and 3, and the end of the High Republic into the prequel era with the Acolyte.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw something, like an interview that's been like, they're starting to put out these pre-recorded ones out there, and one of them was like, Lee Jung Jae, which Jedi would you want your character Master Soul to meet? And he's like, oh, Qui-Gon, I think would be like the perfect fit. And I think from what we'd already seen in the trailers and everything, he seemed like a character that has strength and wisdom, but definitely passion to him too. And I mean, nobody's going to be exactly like Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon's almost quirky in the way that he handles his emotions, kind of laughs at himself a lot. and I don't think this is really what Master Soul's character is like. But I am very excited for his character. I do think that how he's gonna fit in, his stalwart personality will really show off in a lot of these action sequences, especially. Like he feels like the most stoic of fighters too, very composed and controlled, like we've seen from some of these release clips. So I'm excited for him. I think it's always a big get when you can get someone who's just off of like the biggest thing of their career internationally, at least with Squid Game, to then show up in Star Wars. It's like, hey, take another huge step in your career right here. And I think just from what the cast and everyone been saying, he's definitely been like a presence on the production floor with them.
Yeah, most certainly. And Anthony Tiff, we appreciate all your chats, and we'll get to those as soon as we finish running down these last few characters and discussing the acolyte in general. But keep sending those in, keep sending in your questions, your comments, anything you want to talk about in regards to Star Wars or the acolyte or anything you would like to talk about. But next to Master Indara, played by Carrie Ann Moss. One of the characters we've seen, I feel like, most in a lot of this marketing material. I mean, obviously, Carrie Ann Moss, iconic for science fiction fans as Trinity from The Matrix, but we've seen her in the preview before the Phantom of her fighting and the way she interacts and moves with this the Jedi Order and how she's kind of a lone wolf in a lot of ways. And you see here Master Indara is a Jedi master of great physical and mental skill. She has exacting control of her force abilities, exuding a sense of command and authority with just her presence. Though she does not seek combat, she is skilled enough to engage on her own terms, which is also very cool. And obviously, aligns with what we've seen of the previews, where a lot of it is her dodging or really she's so powerful, so in control that she's able to not pull out her lightsaber, not really try to fight somebody, and kind of exerts that dominance over May, who we have seen, to attack her in these clips. So, what do you think about that description for Master Indara?
Pretty fitting, if you I think, Leslie Headland had mentioned that she wanted to bring Trinity and have her use a lightsaber, and this kind of feels exactly like that.
Yeah,
And I've heard a lot of her interviews with Amandla, and they really do seem like they connected quite a bit in the process of filming together. I know a lot of people have been worried about her character because she's been the one really pushed out there, but we don't seemingly see her in like the forest sequence and all that. So they're like, is she one of the
yeah,
Jedi who died quickly? Hopefully not. And if she does, I'd like to still at least see her in some of these flashbacks and stuff. But yeah, I mean, what we saw in the preview in theaters, she looks like a great fighter, right? I was in some ways more impressed with that than I was with the Master Soul sequence that got released a little later.
hmm,
I think that one showed off more of someone who is kind of calculating and just like saying, all right, what are you really going to give me, right? As opposed to
right.
just being like, I'm closing the door on you. I'm not going to even like engage with anything risky. Like she seems like someone like can handle a little bit more, is kind of asking your character, if you're going to attack me, what are you really going to do? Make sure you know what you're doing, right? And I mean, I've enjoyed that. And she got caught off a little bit in the preview that we saw, and I think it's been released online too. So I think once those moments happen, that's when we're going to start seeing her level up. And I think that fits quite well with her description.
Absolutely. So the next character we have to discuss is Kelnaka, one that, hasn't been at the forefront of much marketing other than just images of him, but I'm very excited for what Kelnaka is going to bring to this show. Description is a Wookiee Jedi Master. Kelnaka has sequestered himself in the tangled jungles of Kofar. He is a loner who lives a solitary life. So the shortest description so far by a long shot, but I think this type of character is one that really intrigues me because I love the whole idea of lone Jedi returning it back to like that origin, obviously, of the samurai connection to the Jedi with the original trilogy, and then kind of something that was heavily brought into Legends with those early books because of their influence on the Jedi and the original trilogy. And this seems like something that is kind of brought to life by that. He's off doing his own thing. He's in some ways having his own form of solitude, but I think this is going to be a really cool Jedi to see fight in live action. We've obviously had Buryaga or Lobaka characters in the past, Jedi characters in the past who have been in books or comics, but we haven't seen this in live action. I can't wait to see how a Wookiee fights with a lightsaber and stuff in live action. Kelnaka certainly like my most anticipated character to see in this show, even if he doesn't end up being that important.
Yeah, and I think George Lucas is probably the one who's most happy about this character poster because he's not wearing the Jedi robe that we've seen, right? We have more of the
Mhm.
classic bandolier-esque Chewbacca look to him. He's just got his fur, which I think is pretty surprising. I think it'd be a hint that like that's how we're gonna see him in this. Well, the first named planet that we gone out of the Acolyte that seems new and original too, right?
Yeah,
Kofar. Maybe it's that one where we see the Jedi kind of overlooking all those like misty covered trees or something. Maybe
right.
that's how you bring him into the plot. And we've also seen him like jump down with a lightsaber, which is a terrifying image of like a 7 foot tall beast of an alien just coming down and like he's got a lightsaber on top of that too, right? So very excited. I'm very curious, very, very curious to see how his story is going to be handled because I don't think he's going to be immediately introduced. I wouldn't even be surprised if he's not even in the episodes till like maybe episode 3 or something in this show. But regardless, still very, very excited. I want to see what like that reintegration with these other Jedi looks like for me because yeah, if he is solitary and been secluded, what does that mean for him, and does he even have any interest in doing that?
Absolutely. So I mean that's yeah, that's gonna be an awesome character. Hopefully he doesn't get Phasma or Boba'd and isn't in just, a couple scenes. Hopefully it's got a real story. But the last character we have to talk about, and this one was a bit of a surprise for me, even though Daphne Keene is one of the more famous actors in this show because of her connection, obviously, to Marvel with Logan playing X-23, and then obviously we have Deadpool and Wolverine coming out this year. So I feel like maybe they're trying to just know who she is, but this character has not really been featured like at all in much marketing material. Jackie Lawn, and Jackie Lawn is a skilled and studious Padawan learner. Jackie Lawn shows great promise in her path to becoming a Jedi Knight. The Padawan apprentice to Master Soul is young, but she projects calm and conducts herself with maturity. So I think in a lot of ways, this is going to be our mirror character for May. We've already seen in the trailers and the TV spots and stuff, Master Soul trained May, and then now May has turned away from the Jedi Order, turned on Master Soul at least, and now is walking her own path. What that entails, we don't know necessarily what it is, but Jackie seems to have replaced May, obviously. So Jackie being somebody who projects calm and conducts herself with maturity. Maybe May with how she left the Jedi Order, now walking a darker path. I think we see these two at odds quite a bit in the show, and kind of the ideology of uh, former apprentice versus current apprentice. We've seen that played out in canon. I think a lot. I mean, in Legends too. Qui Gon had his two apprentices or three apprentices, but he had Xanatos, and then he had Obi Wan, and then you have in canon with Dooku's apprentices. So there's a lot of kind of ways we can compare this to other things we've seen in books and stuff. But I think the idea of seeing this on the screen, right? Like getting a former Padawan and a current Padawan together to fight each other in a way and mirror their stories in the actual show. I think that's something that is now more intriguing than before when I didn't know that Jackie Lon was Master Soul's Padawan.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good point that she has been a little bit disconnected in the marketing. I feel like only like in the last couple of days I've seen something other than the trailer sequences that we've gotten of her. I think May pulls a knife on her in that forest fight, so they're gonna be very much face to face at each other's neck. But she has been described to have a little bit of like a interesting relationship with the yellow lightsaber Jedi Yord, I believe is his name, and how he's a Jedi Knight and he's kind of more immature than she is, even though she's a Padawan. Obviously, being under Master Soul and how he's been described, it would make sense that she is almost like more capable in some ways, at least mentality wise. So yeah, I'm very curious about how her story will go. I do feel like she's the one that is gonna be most primed for showing up again in a season 2 or something of this show. I would be pretty sad to see, like, the first hybrid alien lead of Star Wars history to just be gone in, like, 4 episodes or something, so I
Yeah.
think she's the one of the few that's, like, almost guaranteed to be there till the end of the time of this first season, end of this mystery. But yeah, I mean, excited for her all around. You know, I'm very curious what Daphne is going to be able to add to Star Wars because she's been in huge franchises already, and usually when you're kind of walking into established universes with established fan bases and expectations, new characters kind of always like ruin it for some people, right? And she's had a pretty good record, right? She's had his Dark Materials as well, where she was playing the lead
Mhm.
in that. Obviously Logan and X-23, right? For her to be like still talked about today with that performance, this almost feels like okay, you're doing this 3 times, and if you do this, man, like I don't think anything can stop you at this point. You come in any franchise, you're going to be elevating it, but Star Wars is a different level. So I'm very curious how she's going to handle it. I'm very curious how much the story is going to be around her, but I do expect to have her in a lot of pivotal scenes that can really showcase her acting.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a good point too. And I think just from this show, right? Like Master Soul kind of set up to be a transitional style Jedi, right? Like you were mentioning Qui-Gon earlier, that idea of him having that same type of ideology and that fervor around what his beliefs are. I think he's primed to be a Jedi that dies, because as we start to lose these types of characters, that's when we get to the prequel idea of the Jedi, right? That more traditional by the book Jedi, more devout and less room for interpretation in the Jedi code. So I could see Master Soul dying in this season, and then Jackie becoming an even bigger character in next season, like you were mentioning. Like I think that duology, right? That two different sides of the same coin, both being apprentices to Master Soul. What is that going to mean here for the dynamic between Jackie and May? This might be the season, where whatever Master Soul sacrifices, it kind of plays off on May, becomes maybe she's not really seeing herself as the villain, but she doubles down on becoming the villain of this show. And then Jackie is the one that takes over as one of our lead heroes. And that would be awesome too, because I really want to see more aliens at the lead of these shows, just because I think it's awesome to be at that point in Star Wars where we can have, prosthetics and makeup and stuff like that be on a lead character and really enhance the universe. So I would love to see that. Jackie might be that sleeper character, where it's like she doesn't look as important as she actually is going to be. You have these big names like Lee Jung Jae and Amanda Stenberg and Carrie Ann Moss, but right underneath Daphne Keene, she might actually take over the show by the end of
Yeah.
it. We'll see what they do here. But we have a lot of comments from you guys. That was our coverage of most of the Acolyte stories. There's been some other stuff out, like actors are giving interviews about talking about their characters, talking about their time on set. We're not going to cover all that. We just want to talk more generally about the Acolyte. But that was the latest from the Acolyte in the week before it comes out. We have a lot of comments here in the chat. Anthony Tiff says, I'm excited for this new show, and I love the High Republic. Media criticism, in my opinion, unfortunately, has died because it has been misused by people online. I agree with you in a lot of ways, Anthony, because not that media criticism has died, but I think what the general mass accepts as media criticism has died. There's no real nuance in criticism today. You still have it, I think, generally from actual film critics, but now the fact that anybody can get on who doesn't have a background in the subject, has never worked on film, doesn't hasn't studied it, somebody can get online and say whatever they want. That in a lot of ways has created this, 10 or 0, the 5 or 0 type of rating scale, right? Everybody's giving it a 5 or they give it a 0. Nobody wants to give it what it actually is. Nobody wants to talk about the realism of the fact that there are very few movies that are actually ones or zeros out of 10. The thing that's just not how the world works. And so, and just like there's few things that are 10 out of 10s. And so I think you're right in that, like, the nuance and the art of criticism has been lost on a lot of the general masses. I don't know if it's died completely, because there's still people like professional film critics, like professional critics out there who do have a more measured take.
And I guess, we're not crazy about our opinions, and with algorithms today, they're expecting you to be super positive or super negative, especially on YouTube. It's just the tough reality of the world that we live in. And we talk at great lengths about Star Wars to the point that after 5 minutes, most people won't listen to us. In this format, with you guys with the live, it's because you're looking for that. But it's taken us a long time to even be in this position where you can listen to us and do appreciate what we're giving. But there are bigger channels who do way crazier things, both good or bad. And there's going to be more people there who are listening to that sort of thing. So yeah, media criticism, that's like well written, pulled from a variety of sources, that is measured, level headed. It's not common because the moment you do something like that, it's ignored. If you make something that can have a reaction, you will almost find it everywhere on the internet, right? If you're super positive about something on Twitter as a Star Wars fan, you're gonna find someone in your comments saying, "No, that's the worst thing ever," right? And that's how it is with every franchise. And we know that. We try to avoid that. We're trying to make this a welcoming space for all your opinions of Star Wars, as long as it's about Star Wars and not going super crazy, but that doesn't always sell, right? So when we hear all these criticisms about the Acolyte coming out beforehand, and especially with our film background, it is a little disappointing, because we're like, well, you haven't even had the chance to see it. How are we criticizing this, right? The max that we've gotten so far of the previews, which, as we know, sometimes trailers don't even show shots that are in the final product,
True.
right? Like we might
Even
have
with
seen
the Disney
maybe.
products and stuff,
Yeah,
because we've seen that with the
exactly.
MCU a million times.
Yeah, and that could be like maybe 4 minutes that we've seen of a 8 episode first season of this show. Like, yeah, it's frustrating. And a lot of the people who, especially with this being connected to the High Republic book initiative, which has been a lot more left leaning in some ways, a lot more progressive with its topics, with its awareness of issues, with its representation, immediately people are dismissed the show and not like given it a chance to like let this murder mystery play out. And it's frustrating. I totally see where you're coming from, Anthony Tiff, but all we can say is make your own opinion, listen to us if you want to, but know that you're welcome to share it here and foster in this community a space where you can discuss anything about Star Wars and know that's going to be well regarded and well received. That's what we love about this community that we formed, especially through these lives these last year or so, because we can have these discussions, these debates without it ever feeling like it's just because something is being pushed by the masses in one way or by these other group in another way. We're just like, hey, talk about Star Wars and have fun and be respectful. That's all we can do, and I hope you're appreciating that.
And I think in a lot of ways too, what's sad is, Sonic and I were both, film majors. Like, this is what we did in college, and this is what we want to do in the future. And so we have more measured takes about the art because we're part of it. This is what we we appreciate. This is one of our things about our lives. It's not just something we love. It translates into our lives professionally and into what we want to be. But in a lot of ways, and we've seen this too, going through critiques of our own work and stuff like that. In today's world, nobody wants to listen to criticism because they feel like, or and fairly rightfully so, on on the critical side, right? The people we're talking about, when you, online, the boisterous people who hate everything, a lot of that is just noise that you can turn off. A lot of it has no merit. But there are some people with actual merit who discuss and critique things. And because that side is also lumped into the boisterous, noisy side. That's where we have this divide right now between creatives and fans. And it's not just necessarily that one side wants to double down on something or an agenda, and the other they are just purposely trying to make the other side unhappy. I think in today's world, it's more about the creatives are just completely turning off every person
Yeah.
critiquing something
Yeah.
and not listening to actual legit criticism like a lot of you have and like we have. Our criticism is valid because we're not saying it's a 0 out of 10, because that's not realistic. People, that's just not the world. That's not the art of cinema. It's very hard to get there. And even if you do get there, a lot of times it's amazing for its own reasons, like The Room or something. But yeah, that's unfortunately the world we're living to. And back to your actual question, Anthony. And I did appreciate a lot. There was a lot of comments and discussion here. Anthony says people like Cody Leach, Chris Stuckman, Jeremy Johns, they're all very good. I do appreciate all of them. Cody Leach is also very underrated. I feel like he gives some great measured takes, and I do appreciate his film criticism. I don't watch too many film critics anymore. I used to all the time, but as I've gotten older, really when I got more into the actual, film world, I stopped watching critics and more was like, let me develop my own thoughts through seeing this. And so now I don't really ever look at critics, but those three guys were all great. I know Chris Stuckman's gone away from really critiquing things anymore. It's more of a film appreciation channel. That's completely his right. And I know he got, lambasted for that. But um, I still enjoy his takes on a lot of things that he does love because he's a very passionate film fan as well. But to go back to your actual question, Anthony says, "Why do you guys think there has been a lot of negativity towards new Star Wars stuff? I believe it's due to unrealistic expectations and just blatant hatred for diversity in general. I've seen this hatred from people that have been called the fandom menace and even from popular Star Wars YouTubers. Well, personally, I think is for a lot of those reasons. I mean, those can't be discounted, especially in the world of social media and Twitter and the fact that everybody has an opinion now and the fact that people need to play off, like we just talked about, people need to play off of strong opinions in order to get, views or votes or whatever. You need to play off a strong, passionate opinion. So that's not lost on people. It's the art of controlling the populace, right? Like it's been around forever, and now it's just more blatant because it's in the media we all consume every day on social media and stuff that's in our face, right? So that's one thing for sure. I think in general, the unrealistic expectations were always going to happen with the sequels, and I don't blame people for disliking the sequels. Now, from an more objective standpoint, and I do always argue on these streams and stuff when we talk about Star Wars, there's no objective right or wrong opinion with liking something or disliking something, but there are objective truths about the art of filmmaking, right? There are objectively good shots, bad shots, poor paced movies. It's kind of the nature of the beast. Um, there's not necessarily always going to be uh, things that are working flawlessly in your movie, and I think anybody who watches it can figure that out. But you can still like something and acknowledge the objective flaws in certain things, right? So um, I think the loss of nuance, like you're mentioning, is the main reason there's so much vitriol. People want everything to exactly be how they want it. They don't want to be open to anything different. We've talked a lot in past about the sequels and about how I was incredibly disappointed with a lot of things they chose to do in the sequels, but I can still watch those movies for what they made and appreciate them as their own piece of art and critique them on what they actually did, not things that I wish that were in there or things that I would change. There are moments that I think we can say that where like they leave something on the table. Like I've criticized The Last Jedi for killing Luke because they knew Carrie Fisher had passed away. They knew that there was no legacy character going to be in the next movie, no living actor to play a living legacy character in the next movie. They still chose to kill off Luke. I think you could have done almost the exact same ending for him and moved it to episode 9. But the lack of planning, the lack of cohesion from those stories kind of prevented that. There are a lot of things I don't like about what Star Wars has done. But I think in general, you've kind of hit the nail on the head with the idea of the lack of nuance. There's no nuance in film criticism today. If you want to get clicks, and unfortunately, that's led to a lot of YouTubers who do this full time. We're not full time yet with YouTube, so like it doesn't necessarily impact our channel, our takes, and we vowed to try to never let that impact our takes. But I think in today's world, the only way you can get ahead is to have those strong takes, to appeal to the populace, to appeal to what clicks and what sells. It's just like politicians do with voting; they appeal to what you're going to vote for. It's no different. And so, the more realistic, objective take I feel like from us, that's an ability to see the world like you guys obviously have, the ability to see the world for what is a sham and what's not. And a lot of what you're seeing, a lot of opinion out there, is either people who have no real opinion and are piggybacking off other people's opinion, full slanted, takes to get views or clicks, or people who actually do passionately have those opinions being taken and weaponized by people who just want to, start something online. So it's a lot of everything. And I don't think, I mean, we still know obviously the majority of fans don't have these opinions. It's just the people who are loud enough to share them.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I really want to build off of that last point, like the sharing aspect. How do you share it in this world? It is the internet, right? I mean, all our TV shows now, it's not like it's on syndicated networks, not on cable anymore. We're watching on streaming, which is an internet-based form of watching stuff, right? So everything is to do with the internet now. But I feel like Anthony, like some of the things that you're feeling with the fandom menace and all that, right? It's not new, right? Like we don't know your age and you don't have to reveal that or anything else, but we grew up in the prequel era and we're slightly younger than some of the prequel era people because for us the movie that I think we can most distinctly remember is episode 3 when
Yeah.
in some ways that era was coming to its like popular end in the culture, right? For a lot of people they were like fully aware and conscious of everything, right? From special editions to the beginning of EU with Thrawn trilogy, and obviously the build up, the hype, the marketing to episode 1. And then they had forums, right? They had all these places before modern social media existed. And I think what a lot of Star Wars fans who are, frustrated by like the interactions that they have around the sequels or anything with Star Wars today, what they're forgetting is a lot of this stuff was there in like the pre-social media age. If anything, Star Wars has always been a little bit of like a precursor to what's coming into pop culture, what's changing about how people are discussing and dealing with things. And we don't want to say like, oh, the internet is not the real world, you should dismiss it, because no, it's only becoming more and more parts of our lives and the lines are getting blurred day by day. At the same time, right, are we going to fully, with our knowledge, our experience, our background, even our historical background as Star Wars fans, going to be like, oh man, like this is all under Disney, it's all been bad? We're not going to say that because it's just not true. But you hear someone on Twitter say it to a big enough crowd, they share, they spread it, whatever it may be, and then suddenly you might have that pop up in your feed, and you might feel like, oh my God, is this just how it is? We assure you, it's not. It's just that this is just what the internet does. It just makes things louder, and we saw it when we were prequel era fans. When it was only the prequel era after the original trilogy, we had people making a movie literally called "The People versus George Lucas," talking about how he ruined our childhood and all these things, right? So the internet was a way for them to like start making a lot of this so-called criticism and hatred and everything come out. So it's not going to get better, unfortunately, unless, we can see systematic changes to how internet criticism and discussion works. But that's the hard part about the internet. Nobody controls every single detail of it. It's just how it is now. So Yeah, it's difficult, and I get your point too about the popular Star Wars YouTubers kind of doing that. We have some that we don't really like either because they have changed, right? They're not who they were 5, 6 years ago. We can recommend channels like Star Wars Explained and Eckhart's Ladder and all these that have like been consistent, and if they've changed, like Hello Greedo, like around the prequels, they've been open and forward with it. But there are a lot of people who are only changing, are only making such noise because it's a money game. It's a numbers game. So, yeah, as a Star Wars fan, it can be frustrating because there's a lot more attention than most franchises ever get. But this is also like how the rest of fandom is operating now. It's not just Star Wars. The only thing is that we've had like an entire generation to deal with it. So if you're feeling a little down, if you're feeling a little worn out, trust us. Some of us have been in this fight for like a decade plus minimum, if not 20 years. Some of us have been here since 77, seeing how everything's been going on, right? So, if you need a safe space to just talk Star Wars, always know the Star Wars lads, we've got you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I want to preface too, like we don't know any of these other Star Wars YouTubers really. Like we had
Yeah.
very few little contact with a lot of Star Wars YouTubers. And so like the people Sonic mentioned, and then Anthony mentioned Stupendous Wave, who's also very good. Their channel is really good as well. I think we don't know what anybody's motive. That's just seen from an objective standpoint, watching just the content, right? We don't know anybody. We don't know what they're trying to do. So I'm not trying to speak for anybody as any Star Wars YouTubers out there because they might have other reasons. And I know for sure, and it's very valid. There are plenty of people who hate the sequels or hate a lot of this stuff because they actually hate it, and that's a true, real opinion, and that's great.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's their opinion. They can have that opinion. Nobody's expected to like everything, but I think you have to develop that opinion on your own. Like I don't. That's for me why I kind of stopped watching any form of criticism. Why unless or for some things I'm excited about. Like I watch criticism sometimes for things I'm interested in, maybe not sure if I should watch or read. I'll watch criticism for things that might be kind of good, but we'll see. I don't watch too much film criticism for things that I'm really truly excited about because I want to form my own opinion. And I think a lot of times you just hear people piggybacking off of popular opinions. Um, and that's why it feels like it's so overwhelming. But yeah, there are great Star Wars channels out there, and if your thing is to not enjoy the sequels, that's also fine too. We both enjoy them enough. um, I've definitely soured on some of the points about them over the years. I mean, the hype, starts to dissipate. You do start to be more realistic. But overall, I still enjoy watching every Star Wars movie. There's not going to be a Star Wars movie that I don't enjoy watching, even if I disagree with some of the decisions that were made. But to follow up on some of these points too, before we move on to the next set of comments here, because this has been a great discussion. Colton did say it always seems to go back to the sequels in any Star Wars discussion, and that's very true, But hey, it'll be our sequel chat for this stream. um, but trying to find where we left off. Oh, I think, yeah, Chris said very nuanced Star Wars takes out there like y'all. I'm a big fan of the EU and YouTube channels, but they hold it in such a pedestal that the Crystal Star, you'd think the Crystal Star was better than Dark Disciple. And yeah, we love Legends, but we're pretty realistic about it. Like Dark Disciple is one of the great books of all time. I have seen that. And, we host these polls and stuff too. And I think not necessarily that's not necessarily our most positive side of our channel community. Let's just say that. I think the people that join us on these lives, like all of you, the people that join us on a lot of our videos, that's definitely the more positive side of the community. But I've seen some of these polls and stuff or shorts that I put out a short a long time ago at Crystal Star, and I've gotten some people like it's definitely better than all the Disney books. And I don't usually respond to the negative comments as much anymore, or we don't, either one of us. But that one was like, have you read a Disney book? Because
Yeah.
there's the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy. There's some of the High Republic books. There's the Thrawn canon
Bloodline.
trilogy. There's Bloodline, the Shadow of the
Yeah.
Sith. There's Master and Apprentice. There's so many great books that the Crystal Star is not better than, even if you want to say it's better than, if you, even if you appreciate the Crystal Star more than, let's say, a mid tier canon book. Um, I didn't think the Crystal Star was as awful as everybody said it was when I read it, but it was still really bad. I didn't think, but Children of the Jedi is a lot worse. Let me say that for sure.
Let's just say the Jedi Prince series and I have never really seen eye to
Uh,
eye.
yeah, that one's not great either. But yeah, appreciate your comment there, Chris. Uh, Travis says, I think with criticism film channels, 2014 to 2019 was the age of creativity and unique voices. Then it became oversaturated and lost nuance. Everyone began sounding the same. That's a great point too, because when YouTube was, emerging as an actual source, a place where you can actually have a career, I think that's when you had more individualized voices. Now you kind of have to end up falling into one of the camps if you're a big channel. And that's kind of sad in a way, because a lot of times the big channels really should be paving the way for a lot of channels like in a lot of ways ours, but a lot
Yeah.
of other channels where you have voices that are unique to that individual, because they can have those voices and people will listen to them. You might still get all the negative comments, but people will listen to them. And so you have to wonder, do these people actually, are they, what came first, chicken or the egg, right? Are these the opinions that were set, or are these opinions followed by the masses? It's interesting. It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great point that you bring up there because yeah, like I'm thinking about like the MCU being at its like at that point peak of like every movie was like massive hit after hit after hit. But I oftentimes found, even though I was like not fully invested in the MCU until much later into phase three, I found that I'd always like check out these reviews of YouTubers because a big thing online in the mid 2010s was that, hey, all these websites they use for like reviews like IMDb and Fandango, they're owned by the studios. They're like getting money pumped into, and people are like, oh, eventually they're like, Disney's buying every review for these MCU movies, oh no, this and that, right? And the one thing I could rely on was like, hey, I know this is a YouTuber who's got like a pretty decent following and has said some cool things about the Marvel comics and shows and movies, that only movies at that point, and I want to hear what their opinion is before I check it out or like eventually get into the MCU more fully. Right now, like studios have also caught up to that, right? They include and invite influences for everything, right? And there's
Mhm.
going to be that part of any fandom who's like, that just feels fake and inauthentic. That's been a bit of a discussion right now with the Acolyte because they invited some influencers, some YouTubers, and 5, 6 years ago, I don't think people were making those same critiques, right? Maybe, yeah, maybe a little more than 5, 6 years ago, but now, like almost every time you hear of anybody who's could be a super fan or just a casual fan, they're in the same camp because, oh, they're bought out. Oh, there's no way they're gonna be super negative. And that's how we started our stream. That these premieres where all these people are invited for, they're gonna be a little bit more positive naturally. But are we now
Yeah.
gonna fully dismiss their criticisms and dismiss their positivity? No, you have to kind of learn to read and have a little bit of literacy and see the things that you're looking for that point out if this is not just something that is being spouted and copy pasted, or if it's just something that's truly from their own words and their own beliefs and what they saw on the image from the screen, right? It takes a little bit more effort, sure, but in some ways, we're just going back to what it was before all the internet and all of these YouTubers and everyone started becoming the voices and the reasons that we chose to go to these movies in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point too. But yeah, so I want to assure everybody, Chris, Travis, all your comments that are up there, we'll get back to them. We're just kind of going through the things that are still on this train of thought before we move on to a different train of thought here. And we do still have the the topic of George Lucas's comments about Star Wars and Disney Star Wars that we were going to go over as well. But we we put especially the chat as a priority in these types of streams, especially because next week we're going to move on to Acolyte. It'll be more Acolyte focused. We can have these conversations. So let's continue these conversations. And Colton, I'll get back to your comment about Furiosa. I did actually see it. And I want to talk about it. So we'll definitely get back to that. Anthony says, you guys are one of the best Star Wars YouTubers. and only the few I like because their comment section is so toxic. Yeah, I mean, we hopefully our comment section stays less toxic, but I think the nature of growing is eventually it's going to get more and more toxic. But hopefully, there's voices like you, Anthony, and the rest of the people in this chat that are also on the comment section, giving the positives, and you guys give thumbs up to those comments so that they go to the top and it looks more positive. Um, who else do we have here? We have Opinion Guy says, I hope the Acolyte is good. I feel like it could be my second favorite live action Star Wars show. That would be awesome. We hope so too. I think that's where I'm hoping it hits for me, because I love a lot of the Mandalorian, but I don't think it's untouchable. I think for me, Andor is the top tier right now, and then eventually, I do think something could catch it though. It would have to be great, but I think something could catch it. But I do think the Mandalorian is gettable at that number 2 spot. So we'll see. Anthony
Yeah,
also says, "Oh, you sorry, go ahead,
I
sir."
just want to point out it does seem like now with, and we've talked about this on the lives too, but with the Mandalorian story seemingly finished in a way, and the Mandalorian and Grogu being the next of that universe to come out, that little sub universe of Star Wars live action right now, the money's going somewhere, right? And it feels like it's being pointed toward the Acolyte to be like that next flagship show, especially when you're trying to make the Mandalorian and Grogu these big time movie level characters again, as like your way of getting back into the movies that Star Wars has been pretty afraid of since the Rise of Skywalker. So yeah, I mean, there's this skeleton crew, Ahsoka, but it might be rotating a little bit more so than it has been with Manda in terms of like budget and priority for that year.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I think Acolyte can be that next big show for them.
I hope so. And I love the idea that it is open for season 2. Like, we've had way too many, as much as a great miniseries can be awesome, we've had way too many miniseries for Star Wars, and we've had way too many miniseries for Marvel, way more miniseries for Marvel. But
Yeah.
I think Disney Plus is, one of the reasons you see that churn. And I think it's something they're definitely trying to put at the forefront to keep subs, is the idea that a lot of these shows, when they end, it's over. So if you subscribe for Obi-Wan, there's no more promised in the future. At least with Mandalorian, there was promise of season 2 and season 3. It should not take 2 or 3 years to get those seasons, but uh, we really need to get back to the days of like TV shows coming out at least once a year, maybe even less if you're depending on the length of the show. And then also get back to a time when there was at least a promise of more coming in the future. And depending on results, we could see more. But yeah, it's like every studio nowadays wants to green light 2 seasons at a time, 3 seasons, 4 seasons. They want to have that like budget in their head before they start shooting. And I know that's more realistic probably for the numbers around these highly expensive TV shows. They want to know what they have to budget, and they want to know what numbers they have to hit. But in a lot of ways, I think you lose the fan engagement and excitement, especially when there's so many services, so many places out there where you can go consume your TV. Not having a reason to stick around because you're not sure if there's more coming is a big reason why I think people would drop a subscription. So we'll see what they do with that. Anthony says, I love both canon and EU, but yes, I have criticisms of both. Yeah, we do too. K-pop Time says, love Star Wars Explained. Star Wars Explained is one of the best Star Wars channels out there. I think in all variety, or in every way, really. It gives great lore, information, does a lot of cool things, some great live streams. Does an unreal amount of content. Like, I can't. We used to do a ton of content, and we got more focused, try to give you guys better content instead of more content. The thing, the approach that I appreciated so much about Bob Iger for so long with Disney, that he's also trying to get back to with Disney and Star Wars, is that quality over quantity. But Star Wars Explained is able to somehow pump out both, and they do a great job over there. I really appreciate their channel.
Yeah, I feel like Alex and Molly, they both seem like they're just 100% locked in. I'm sure they get a little bit of help here and there, like maybe thumbnails or like edit some specific videos, but for the most part, that's just them. They're just workhorses, and yeah, it's insane. Like even on their lives, they're building something, right? Like we're just talking to you guys. They'll be like, "Let's build a Ultimate Collector Series version of this Star Wars vehicle," and I'm like, "How are you multitasking?"
Anthony says, another reason why I left a lot of Star Wars communities is because people kept calling me a fake fan. because I love the sequels, particularly The Rise of Skywalker. What got me into Star Wars was reading my brother's comics, which was Dark Empire, when I was 6. Yeah, so you've seen both sides of
Yeah.
the EU and canon. Obviously, similar story like you're mentioning. So, um, and hey, and you say I absolutely agree with you. I've criticized The Rise of Skywalker multiple times for good reason, but I still love it. And that's completely fair. I love that you love The Rise of Skywalker, even though I've grown to like that movie less and less every time I watched it. I still love that people love it because I, at one point, kind of did. I really enjoyed it. Leaving the second time I watched it. The first time I left the theater, wasn't quite sure about it. The second time I watched it, really loved it. And then it's dropped for me since then. But I'm glad you really enjoy it because there are a lot of awesome things in that. We've never disputed the fact that they actually go for something in that movie, which is one of the reasons I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Um,
and a big thing is like that movie in some ways feels like that could set up the next 15 years before this new Jedi Order, and then we can make this feel like a bigger era. Because in some ways, right, being minutes apart between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, and The Force Awakens doing nothing to explain the political state of a new republic just before it gets destroyed, and having some of those scenes shot and then cut out, right? It makes The Rise of Skywalker as messy as it is, as too quick cut as it is. I mean, honestly, in the year 2019, when we had a 3 hour Marvel movie, we couldn't even get 2.5 hours for Star Wars. Like, I
yeah.
will always complain about that. If you made that a 3 hour film, I think people would have genuinely felt a lot better about the plot points, even if you don't agree with all of them. Because, man, that first 15 minutes, it's hard. It's hard to like settle in, right? And when we were watching it in the marathon, like we were tired, obviously. We're up for 24 hours, but like hearing like voices crisscrossing a lot, like I never had the issue with that with the film before. But at that point, I was like, man, like I don't like that they're always just talking to each other and not like back and forth. It's just cross currents concurrently, and that's something that became a negative for me, and I think I'll notice that more moving forward. But that doesn't mean I don't love the lore of that film. I really do think it has such potential to be mined and enrich the rest of what's come before, and especially what's come after. But right now, Disney is a little averse to really exploring that era, so we got to be hopeful that the new Jedi Order is both really strong as a film and also does continue a lot of what the sequel kind of left behind, especially with the Rise of Skywalker, to really dig and explore. Like Star Wars always edits itself, retcons itself, fleshes out itself. I'm not worried about the sequels in that sense. It may never feel as strong as the first two trilogies for me, and that's just my opinion, but I'm also like a fan of what The Rise of Skywalker does with being like, let's just give you everything and then be like, maybe let's pull back the curtain a little bit here when I'm just ready to just dive into some of the more spectacular ideas that it definitely has.
Yeah, I think if they stick the landing on more of the traditional Star Wars stuff they go through in that movie, it would still, be towards the upper half of my rankings, or maybe the just outside the upper half. Like, it would be close between it and The Last Jedi for sure, and it might go up towards Force Awakens because it does have a lot of filmmaking problems, but I can get over those considering how often I watch Star Wars. In terms of like my favorites, I still think it is one of, if not the weakest in terms of Star Wars like objective film things. Right, like it's not well paced. It's not. Um, it's not particularly the best like high concept Star Wars story, but it is something that goes for lore, and I do really appreciate that. And it goes for a lot of things that I really like. I think if it had stuck the landing on a few more of the traditional storytelling elements, I would like it a little bit more. But yeah, I'm glad you like it, Anthony. And Opinion Guys says I've been criticized for my favorite Star Wars movie being Return of the Jedi, and not saying Empire Strikes Back is a top 3 Star Wars movie. That is definitely an opinion guy.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your opinion. I mean, I'm glad you love Return of the Jedi so much. For me, it just gets out of the top 3. It's my number 4. I like Revenge of the Sith is my favorite all time. I always say Empire is the best. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite. Then Empire, then A New Hope, then Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, I won't say current age me is the biggest fan of Return of the Jedi. If you've been following us on our channel, I have a lot of criticisms for it, but I will say that opinion guy. I fully respect your opinion there, and I think 7-year-old me would have loved your opinion about Return of the Jedi. Empire probably too, because I don't think Empire was ever as strong for me as a kid as it then became years and years later as I understood just some of the filmmaking choices and the story choices that I've really grown to love and realize are like defining for all things Star Wars even today. So glad it's your opinion. Don't be loud, be proud about it. We're not going to dismiss that. This is the Star Wars lads. You can share that fully.
Yeah, we really appreciate that. A lot of you guys, these next few comments are really nice, and it's one of the things we love to do with these live streams is it allows us to at least solidify, because the comment sections, like you guys are mentioning, they can get toxic, and they can get toxic on our videos, and can get toxic on our community polls and our shorts. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the nature of it. Like, you can't really police it. Maybe when we were smaller, we can police it a little bit better because we only got so many comments. But now with how many comments we get, it's hard to be like, respond and give a more positive look to everybody who's negative. But we do love to have these live streams because it allows us to go one-on-one with you guys, or at least it feels like it. Like, I feel like I'm talking to each one of you individually, and it's enjoyable to be able to you know mention your guys's thoughts and your opinions, and really give you a more unfiltered look at what we think. So it's really nice when you guys, the next few comments you guys have here. Anthony says the great thing about you guys is that you guys allow for different opinions, not just calling people fake fans. And it's and says that it's not new hate, just evolved hate for the sequels, from the prequels. It's changed. Uh, and that Colton says, I've never commented on a Star Wars channel publicly until I found Star Wars Lads, best community around. And K-Pop Time says, glad you found your Star Wars people here. I love Star Wars Lads for your High Republic content. You guys are reliably post great reviews and actually talk about the books, which I love. So really appreciate all those things from all three of you. Thank you so much. That's what our goal is on the channel, is just to enjoy and discuss Star Wars, talk about the bad when it's bad, but not beat it beat it like so hard with a hammer
Yeah.
that it's just, a pulp lying in front of you. And like, Star Wars should be thought about. It should be criticized. We shouldn't turn blind eye to things that are bad. I've been very, very vocal about that on the channel because, like you were kind of mentioning, Senek, like in this world of Twitter, you can have a positive Twitter and you get reinforced by all the positive things. You have negative Twitter, you get reinforced by all the negative things. We shouldn't turn a blind eye to bad things. We can still say we enjoyed it, but we should not let it pass because it's Star Wars. Because otherwise, if somehow somebody at Lucasfilm is hearing this, right, they need to be better. They need to be better on certain things. We can't just make everybody think it's okay to make mediocre stuff. And I'm not saying everything has been mediocre. I'm just saying in general, creatives need to listen to people's criticism. You need to make things that people want to see. You need to make things that are good. And if you listen and you take that criticism and you're like, you know what, they actually have a little bit of value there. You don't always have to listen to every criticism, but you need to at least hear it. And it needs to either go through one ear and out the other, or it needs to come in and you need to think about it and be like, I can kind of see that perspective. Maybe for season 2, I'll try this. That, I think, is what's missing in today's discourse. It's unfortunate because, it is so polarizing when you have creatives versus fans. And it is something that is unrealistic to ask of the world today, but it is unfortunately something that creatives are going to have to sift through the negatives to find the actual real legit criticism when there's a lot of voice around something. And so I've been I appreciate that you guys really enjoy the channel. I really do, because it's something that we really have worked hard on and tried to create this space, and to create this space specifically for those comments, right? We want you guys to tell us your favorite Star Wars movie. We're happy to hear about why. We have our favorites. My top 4, my top 3 for sure, probably never going to change, no matter how many great things could be made. Probably never going to change because I've grown up with these movies. I've loved them forever. I've lived and breathed these movies a million times. It's always going to be hard to accept things new into this franchise because so many of us love it and consume it over and over and over again. But what we can do is at least try to appreciate certain things as works of art, even if we don't necessarily want to accept them into like our headspace of Star Wars or our recurring Star Wars watches, right? it's a fine line. It's a weird one with Star Wars, especially because Star Wars has always been one continuity. It's always been its own little thing, and it's always hard to accept new. But we've tried our best on this channel to really allow for everything, all opinions, and all people to come here and just rant and talk about what they love, and we will never judge you. So really, it makes me incredibly happy to hear those comments.
Yeah, and then just to point out, opinion guy, you're saying you're comparing me to a 6-year-old. I mean, 6-year-old me was living the life, man. He just had all the Star Wars Legos and toys. Like, if anything, I think he's probably a better judge of Star Wars than I am because he just talks about, hey, I like this about Star Wars instead of thinking about, oh, the world is like this. Like, it's unfiltered. It's can't even say the word, unadulterated, right? It is just Star Wars, right? That kid was in it, like in a way that I don't think, as much as this channel has really allowed me and Liam to become better Star Wars fans, I don't think we'd be as fanatical as some of our younger versions were. Like, those are the kids that made us into who we are today. And you know, I'll always respect a kid talking about Star Wars as long as they're not like saying like your ideas about Star Wars are stupid. I'll be like, all right, I've been in this fight much longer than you, so let's not go that far. But if you love this Star Wars movie, if you want to talk about it endlessly, yeah, I think kids sometimes have some of the greatest Star Wars takes ever. So again, I want to make it very clear, opinion guy. My opinion is just that, you favor comparably with the younger version of myself there. That's all it is.
So I'm going to scroll back to the top of these comments. We'll get to the George Lucas thing if we have time. I'm sure you guys have probably seen that. Unless you comment below if you want to see the George Lucas discussion about the things he said about Disney, Star Wars, and stuff he's just talked about in general with Star Wars, because he did receive the Honorary Palme d'Or this week, which was pretty awesome. So let us know at the bottom of the chat if you want to see us get to that. Otherwise, we can keep taking questions and try to get to as many as possible. But to go back up to Chris, who's been waiting a long time for his comment to get answered. Looks like people do want the George Lucas thing. Okay, so we'll answer Chris's question. We'll get to George Lucas, and then we'll get back to the rest of these comments. Try to get to as many as possible before we wrap it up for the night. But Chris, who's been waiting a long time, said, any predictions for... Oh, wait, no, that was actually your second comment, Chris. Sorry, you've been waiting a even longer time than I originally thought. You said, if you guys had to pitch a TV show, a Star Wars TV show, a Star Wars movie, a comic, and a novel for the next 5 years, what would you do for each?
Oh man,
I saw that comment earlier. I tried to start thinking about it, but then I kind of lost it while we went on that whole tirade. That is a very in-depth question. We might need to bounce. Let's start with TV show.
yeah.
So I've been talking about the Dark Times show for animation, and that is truly what I want to see next for animation, just because the Clone Wars era, these characters, I think they deserve a proper send-off. The Bad Batch was a really good show. It wasn't a send-off for the era. It wasn't a send-off for the clones. I think those characters deserve something that truly sends us off into the twilight. And what better way to do it than to never have filler, to never have boring stuff, just focus on everybody and everything that goes on this timeline, make it 5-6 seasons, go on as many stories as you want. And when you feel like you've wrapped it up, wrap it up. It doesn't have to be an obligatory, 10 season thing. I want to see that for animated TV. For live action TV, I mean, I would very much so like to see Bane next. We talked last week about the Old Republic and a lot of the rumors about KOTOR now becoming TV show instead of being the video game remake, being the canon version. And I would love that, but I think working backwards still is probably the best idea. We've devoted so much time to High Republic, which has been, right, that transitional period between the fall of the Sith Empire, the defeat of the Brotherhood of Darkness, if you want to take the Legends version, and then eventually the fall of the Jedi.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting what you pointed out about Bane, because in canon we know from one of the Star Wars comics that officially his end comes in 1,000 years before Battle of Yavin, which lines up like pretty closely with what it was in Legends, anyways.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting how you said like go back in time, but not like go way too back and then try to flesh it out because I think that is smarter. I think that is where KOTOR kind of runs into a lot of its issues, especially since a lot of these things were happening concurrently in the early 2000s. That like it was the same issues in some ways as like 90s Bantam era stars, where everyone could just write a story and then yeah, we'll figure it out. But it was a lot harder by the 2000s when so many things were established and fleshed out. So and you're still leaving space, obviously, in that 1,000-year gap to, if you want, do like another whole era. If you want, we're not saying don't like ignore those time periods. It just might not be something you immediately go to. You want to kind of make those
Right. Yeah.
big, like plant your flags in certain time periods and make the stamp here and there. So for me, I'm fully on board with Liam's Dark Times idea. That's what I've been kind of clamoring for a while too. But he's definitely laid it out. So check out that video. If I were to pick something more specific, I would say I'd love to see a Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order TV show, and I think that could work both live action and animation. I would say if I really want something super fleshed out, I'd want it to be in animation. If I want it more so to just be like an era of Luke's Academy, maybe like during the first 10 years of when like things are kind of running well, yeah, I'd prefer to go with something more around like Mark Hamill. And he looks great. He looks like he did 10 years ago, honestly, the way he's been keeping up his fitness and his health. He can, a little bit of makeup and everything, you won't even notice like, oh, he's 10 years older, like, and you don't have to make him this Jedi like Yoda is in episode 2 where he's jumping around and doing all these crazy acrobatics. You can still make him more of like that Empire Strikes Back Yoda where he's teaching, going more on like excavations and missions of that sort, where he's just learning about the Force with his Padawans, like kind of in tow, kind of like how Yoda is in the High Republic era when he's like dealing with all these Padawans on the ships that he's carrying them around, ferrying them around the galaxy. So I'd love to see that as a TV show, preferably animation, but if we're gonna have it in live action, I think that is something I'd almost want like just a season of a show for, because I don't want to have it become like the only defining thing of like 30 years of Luke dealing
Yeah.
with Jedi and his order. Because I still think you can do so much with him and how he disagrees with a lot of different Jedi, or different Jedi who have survived into this period disagree with him. Maybe even some of his Padawans being like, no, we don't really want to do it this way, Master Luke. And we have our reasons that are just as valid as yours. Like you can make it a very complex story of how his efforts at the Jedi Order didn't work out and why Rey's new Jedi Order is going to be very different, right? And I think it'll be a perfect match with what's going on in that era if you actually complement that era with, okay, this is what happened before, and we still don't know that. That is the kind of the frustrating thing for me. So I'd love to see
Right.
that. As far as live action, if we're not doing that, I want a dedicated show. I'd almost kind of want to have like an X-wing like show, like with the X-wing novels, because I get the idea of a Rogue Squadron film, but I'd want a series. I don't think a film can cover everything that I love
Yeah.
about those
Yeah.
books. So I think, and we've seen it already in some ways perfected with Top Gun Maverick. So why not just make it a little bit more focused on the characters, like the books are, where they can be out of the cockpit quite often and still do some incredible things. But then have enough of a budget for some crazy cool sequences, and maybe some episodes more solely focused on space battles. Like I think the appeal of Star Wars for me with its space battles is that it doesn't happen all the time. If you're suddenly giving me a show that is like 10 episodes of like the best space battles ever, yeah, I'll love it. But then I kind of am like, okay, now I'm bored. I think that's what X-Wing balances so well, and I love to see it handled that way.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'm still holding out hope that we get the Rogue Squadron kind of thing, the movie. I don't want it to be post 9 though. I still really want it to be New Republic era, but we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, X-Wing would be awesome. Uh as for movies for you, Chris, that I was gonna kind of go that direction Sonic went with the TV show. I've been really wanting Mara Jade for a very long time. I wouldn't mind a movie that kind of kicked off what would be maybe filled out in a TV show about Luke's Jedi Order. I think Mark Hamill should still get one chance to shine as like the lightsaber wielding Jedi Master Luke. I'd love to see it on the big screen. I'd love it to also have something to do with Mara Jade. I mean, Mara Jade to get introduced, it needs to be she'll need to be an animation or she'll need to be in a book or something to get introduced before that series, but I still really want to see how she eventually disappears and like is she involved in this continuity? But above all, I just want to see Mark Hamill Rocket as Master Luke. So that would be kind of my movie. My other one is my dream movie, still waiting for it forever, is the Palpatine origin story slash Darth Plagueis. Like that is one of the things I want to see most. I'd love to see Plagueis in live action. I'd love to see the Palpatine origin story because I think there's so many actors who could play young Palpatine really well, like famous A-list actors who could play a great young Palpatine, and I would love to see that rise for Palpatine. I think the Plagueis book, it would be a longer movie, but I think it could work really well as a movie still. It has a plot that is nicely built up into three acts. You would have some time jumps, but you could do referencing Furiosa a little bit. It's broken up into acts and time jumps and stuff. There's an element to it. Like there's a gravity and a weight to that story that I think needs to be done in film. And if it was in TV, I feel like it could be a miniseries and it could be a good miniseries, but I don't think you need to drag it out that long. If you want to go back and flesh it out, I guess you could, but I really want to see the Palpatine origin story, especially now that we're really working on a lot of High Republic to Phantom Menace era stories. Let's see that story eventually done.
Yeah, I like those ideas. I mean, again, I'm also a very big fan of the Mara Jade character. I've always advocated, and I know Liam is obviously even more of a bigger fan than me, but like she can fit in this story. Her timeline in EU and Legends is not much longer than the gaps that we have established here in canon. It can be super important to Luke's character, right? Just like in the way that it honestly should have been in EU, but sometimes it almost feels like her story just disappears and it's her influence and effect when so much of like that late Bantam era and New Jedi Order and all that really felt like Mara was really like a movie level character in terms of appreciation and dedication with her fan base. So I'd love to see something like that in a movie if we can, but if not, like a movie if it ties into like the Mandoverse era, because I still think this is like around the era where you need to bring her, right, to make most sense and timeline it all matches up quite well. For me, movies, I'd almost want to see a Darth Bane movie, but there's so much that I want a trilogy of it. And if we can, I'd love almost to do it like Lord of the Rings esque, where you can talk about like the opening prologue sequence can be sort of like the new Sith Wars that have been raging, because it's always been one of the more messier things I felt about EU, because you see like all these things with KOTOR, the Old Republic, all this and that. But then this Dark Ages, which I've been like trying to search for, like, why is technology so much better in KOTOR and the Old Republic, and why is it so bad by the time of Bane and everything else? I forgot that it was like such a crucial point of that very end of the new Sith Wars, where everything is decimated and everything's almost like warlord controlled and everything. I'd love to see like a prologue showing the fall of technology, civilization, and everything,
Yeah.
and then that's why Bane's influence and everything is so appealing and powerful. I'd love to see that almost done in like a prologue S sequence with like an aging Jedi Master, someone who's like about to be cut down by Bane, who's a very elderly and has seen the era, right? Because then you can still flesh that out and still do cool things. You just need to show the end of old things and why it's been like that. So I'd love that to be the opening prologue of a movie series. So that's where I would go. I just need a reason to see Star Wars decimated and in a way that I've never seen before.
Yeah, and I think that's a good shout as well because Bane could work as movie or series. I think for me, I would prefer it as series because I think there's a lot of elements to the timeline and the storytelling there that I think need to be ironed out and fleshed out on a variety of levels that film would have a hard time getting in a couple hours. Yeah,
Yeah.
if it turned into a trilogy, for sure, I think that trilogy could work. But Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to see how they adapt it. And then I guess we'll make it quick for comics and novels here because we do have a super chat from Colton, and we really appreciate that. Thank you, Colton. We'll get to your question right after we finish this one. And for comics, I'm not really sure with comics where I'd go next. I I don't know. I think I still would like them to jump past Return of the Jedi and start to fill in, what the main characters were doing between Return of the Jedi, the end of Aftermath, all their different little appearances throughout Aftermath trilogy, or Battlefront 2 or Shattered Empire. There's still so much story in those 4 years, the fall of the like technical fall of the Empire at the Battle of Jakku. I want to see what those characters are doing. And so if the comics are going to focus on the OT characters, I would like the comics to move there next once they wrap up Return of the Jedi, or the time between Empire and Return of the Jedi. As for books, still really pushing for the OT characters to find their home in books like it used to be in Legends. I really want that. And I really want their stories during the time of the Mandalorian and Ahsoka and all that. I wouldn't be opposed to recasting. I've said that before. I'm not opposed to CGI versions in small scenes throughout whatever Filoni and Favreau are cooking up in the New Republic. But I would prefer their stories to be done in books. It's where it's always been. It's gets you the most out of these characters, and I think would set them up very nicely for whatever we could do still in live action with a Mark Hamill, or if somehow you could talk Harrison Ford into coming back for a scene.
I want to see the separatist perspectives, what the movement was like before it's kind of getting co-opted by Palpatine, Dooku, and everything else. I think it's a great way for the movie characters and show characters to still play a role, plug in here and there as needed. But I think this is a great way to flesh out, like, hey, there was like a genuine reason to not love the Republic in its twilight before it became a huge colossal thing with the Clone Wars. I think that could be a really interesting storyline. Not necessarily like something that covers everything, but I still think it could be quite good. For novels, I'm in full agreement. I think we need to flesh out that first 5-6 years after Battle of Jakku because we don't know anything other than like some parts of Aftermath and some random things here and there connecting us into the Mandoverse era. Like there's so much that these movie characters can be doing and their positions that we see them in or hear about them being in a Mandoverse. Like you can do an entire book on Leia's Jedi training, right? Like that could be something super fascinating to me. But so far, nothing's happened because it seems like Favreau Filoni seem to almost be controlling even that time period set before, which is a little annoying to me because I hope they fully open it up and let creatives let the original characters be these big stars of these books once more, just like the EU really made them.
Yeah, I'm really hoping for that. That's my number one thing for sure. And we'll see. I think they are holding off because they don't 100% know how they want to wrap up that part of the timeline and what future things spin off from that. But I don't one that has been the number one thing I've been very frustrated with Disney canon is that they haven't really let these original characters breathe in stories that matter. They've really held them back to small appearances or minor stories and a lot of extra material because they don't know what they want to do with them in live action or animation. And it is frustrating because books have been the home for the original trilogy characters for so long. Really, they should be going back to it. To get to Colton, and then finally, yes, the George Lucas topic. We'll make this an extra long stream for y'all since this is the last one before Acolyte. And we won't be doing this with you guys, as many random questions, I guess, as this stream, and for 7 weeks until Acolyte's over. Colton says, "Love the streams. A question I've debated recently is listening to an audiobook the same, like count the same as reading a book?" I think that's a really interesting question. And there are different parts of it for sure. Audiobooks are definitely designed to be more engaging, than obviously reading. You have to have a passion and an interest in reading, an ability to, push away the world and focus on the page and get engrossed in the page. Whereas audiobooks definitely help out with, sound and music and a lot of other things that really enhance and make it a multi-layered audio experience. So there are pros and cons to both, but I think I would say yes, and purely for the fact that at the heart of it, the story is the same. And when you're judging a book's story, it doesn't necessarily matter in which form you're consuming it, as long as you're consuming the whole thing. So if you're listening to an unabridged book, it is the exact same thing as reading the book. You're just listening to somebody else read it to you. Could it be enhanced? Could you enjoy the experience a bit more than reading it on your own? Yes, and I think that's where the pacing can be different between both, right? You can enjoy the pacing of an audiobook more than you might enjoy the pacing of actually looking at the words and reading it yourself. But I do think, depending on who you are, that experience, you can have a similar experience in both. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're a reader and you said now are switching to audio only, you might not enjoy the story as much because you're not used to the audio. But if you're an audio person and you switch to just reading, you might not enjoy the story as much as you could have because you're used to just to listening to the audio. So, like, I think whichever one you pick, you kind of have to pick a lane, or you have to, do both consistently enough. Both Sonic and I both do both, but we do it consistently. Like, I read very often and I listen very often. So I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on both. Has audio enhanced books that I already loved and I've listened to them a second time after I've read them in audio form? Yes, like Plagueis. I loved it when I read it. I loved it when I listened to the audiobook, and I loved it even more. I memorized certain things from the audiobook that were in there. Like, there are a lot of great elements to listening to audio, but I do think they count as the same because you're consuming the same medium. You're just consuming it in a different way. It's not like now, if you listen to an abridged audiobook, I don't think that necessarily counts as reading the book.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think if we're gonna just take it at face value, your question, Colton, I would say yes, because like Liam's saying, it is about the content, it is about the plot, the story there. And then, it brings up questions like if you're, let's say you're sight challenged or visually impaired, you can't read fine text or open a book up and enjoy the story to its fullest like everyone else. How are we going to say like, oh, because you listen to it, it's not good for you, you're not really getting that full reader experience? I don't think so. Now, like, what is a little bit more complicated is how audiobooks are produced. I think that does make it a
Yeah.
little bit more challenging because, especially Star Wars, right? And not even going to the abridged, that's like, yeah, I'm not going to count that. I'm saying if we have the full content, but let's say there's like a lot of sound effects, right? There's different voices like per character instead of just one person doing all the voices. All right, it becomes a little bit more of like an audio drama than it is like an audio book. That does change the experience, right? That is something that is unique in its own sense. So, yeah, I can see the argument there. And, we can't ourselves like say no, audiobook reading is totally not what reading a book is like, because currently, like, we just got Temptation in the Force, but all these High Republic books that we've been able to get from Del Rey, they're audiobooks, right? Some people get them in book form, but we get them in audiobook form. Are we going to say that we didn't read them? No, we definitely did. It was just we just read them in a different way than the traditional sense. And Liam also pointed out that we both read a lot and listen to audiobooks a lot. For me, in that sense, it's like I like to read Star Wars books, but nowadays it is just mostly audiobooks for me. But what I have been doing, like a bit of both, is like I read a lot of Wheel of Time, and those are very high fantasy novels that have like 600 to 800 pages, and it's dense. There's a lot of world building and detail. Sometimes the audiobooks, especially now that I'm like rereading some of the books since I took a break, it really helps me pick up on details that I wouldn't have been able to pick up on my original read. And when I was reading those books, sometimes I loved the story once it really got going, but in those passages where it's just detail after detail after detail, I'd be like, I'm struggling. Now I look forward to when I'm actually caught up to where I was last time, and I'm trying to combine it with reading the book in hand while listening. And I think that's like the ultimate way in some ways of experiencing a book. But then there's purists, right? Purists will be like, I never want to have anyone influencing the images, the voices that I create in my head. And I
Mhm.
can't say that's wrong either, right? It's really what you believe, Colton. If you feel like it's something that's totally changing the experience of reading the book and you feel like you're on a different like plane of existence after reading it compared to someone else and the majority's opinion of reading a book, then yeah, maybe you might have to be someone who only reads it in paper or ebook. But if not, I think we're all on the same page. As long as you're engaging with the content itself, that's reading to me.
Yeah, and that's why I think, the consistency thing is a big part, right? Because it's all about what you're used to.
Yeah.
So that unfortunately is part of the factor. But if you listen to everything, audio, you barely ever read, or you do a lot of both. What I mean by the consistency is like if you're a newbie to like the world of books, right? You read a book and that everybody says is great, and you're like, yeah, that was mediocre. And then you listen to an audiobook for a book that everybody says is bad, and you're like, I loved it. Then yeah, it might change the experience. But if you listen to a lot and then you read a lot, or vice versa, that's the experience you're used to. You're able to judge the experience for what it is compared to all these other experiences you've had. So yeah, but great question. Thank you so much. And for those of you who still want to know, George Lucas talked a little bit this week when he received the Honorary Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which, for those of you who don't know, the Cannes Film Festival is basically the biggest film festival in the world. It's like the one that if you win the Palme d'Or, or the Grand Jury Prize, it's an honor that's up there with winning Best Picture. It's obviously not the same as winning the Oscar for Best Picture, but it's one of the highest honors you can receive, especially on the film festival circuit. So receiving an honorary Palme d'Or is a big deal. George Lucas already won an honorary Oscar in the past, so like this is definitely a huge major career accomplishment. Since the Cannes Film Festival obviously is in France, this is also kind of an international recognition, outside of just the American recognition he gets all the time from people here who love Star Wars. So this is a big deal, and so he got a lot of interviews this week, and he talked about a lot of things. But one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about is his quote about Disney Star Wars, and he says, "quote I was the one who knew what Star Wars was, who actually knew this world, because there's a lot to it. Nobody understood the Force when they started other ones after I sold the company. A lot of the ideas that were in the original sort of got lost. But that's the way it is. You give it up, you give it up. The new films have a lot of talent, great ideas, and production. I feel like they come from my children, and sometimes it hurts a little when they grow up and get away from you." So I don't think this is terribly big news. I mean, it's big news in the sense that like everybody always people who want to weaponize things George Lucas says against Disney and current Lucasfilm have more ammo, right? That is the news. But he's been pretty consistent about this for a while. George Lucas, he was consistent about this from when The Force Awakens came out on. He's been bothered and hurt that they didn't use his ideas to the fullest. He wanted exact translations of what he wrote. Um, was that ever going to happen? Probably not. Was it kind of unrealistic to expect that back in 2012 when he sold the company? Yeah, because at the time, nobody wanted to touch the prequels with a 10-foot pole. It was all about the original trilogy. So, uh, was it unrealistic to expect Disney to use his ideas exactly? Yeah. If there was something in the contract, which I doubt there was, because then he would have legal grounds or something that said, you have to make my movies, otherwise I'm not selling this company to you, then yeah, I understand him being pretty perturbed. And I would be perturbed too, if I sold the company and I was like, I really want you to make this, and then you don't make it, yeah, I might be bothered too. But he does try to rebound his comment because I think he knows how inflammatory it's going to make people at the end when he's like, they're like my children, still trying to relate them to him, but in ways he's also like saying they're not really what I want them to do, but I still, appreciate them for what they are. Sonic, how'd you take George Lucas's comments specifically here? He does have other comments about, representation in Star Wars, and to be honest, I thought a lot of what he said about representation in Star Wars is pretty obvious, and I haven't heard too many people like giving those critiques. I didn't watch the exact interview, so I don't know what the context of the question was, but a lot of what he was talking about was stuff that I feel like we've all kind of understood since 77. But this I thought was the more unique quote. What did you think about this quote?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with this one because this is the one that if you're super positive, you're taking more the latter portion, right? If you're super negative, you're taking more of the former, like the beginning part of that sentence that he comes up with. And yeah, like, I think at the end of the day, right, we're here talking about Star Wars because of him, right? But we're in many ways continuing to talk about Star Wars because of the Disney sale. I'm not so sure after the Clone Wars, and I mean, we don't know how much longer it would have run. Maybe it would have been up to like 2014 or 15. What was next for him, right? And he was tired out. He tried some live action films, and outside of Star Wars, they didn't really pan out for him, right? So for him to be talking about Star Wars, like, I'm glad that he's still pretty positive, right? Because that for something that's been both like a blessing and a curse, it's after you sell it off, right? You would think like, okay, maybe he doesn't want to talk about it. Oh, he said some criticisms about The Force Awakens, but then he was like, oh, I thought The Last Jedi was beautiful. Like, we've been picking up snippets here and there, but this was like the nice summation of how he feels to me. I think that that more positive part where he's like, yeah, it's like my children, they're doing their own thing, and I'm proud of them. I love the productions and all that. I think that's true because he's been on these sets quite often. He's been with Favreau, Filoni. He's been with a lot of the newer filmmakers, and he's really lent a hand, giving support. Like, one of my favorite stories is that scene with Kira and Han and Solo Star Wars Story once. Uh, George was on set. They were doing the shot where he's in Lando's closet of capes, right? And he's like,
Yeah,
"Why don't you just have Han like just drop all the capes or like bump into them, right?" Like that's kind of what he would do, right? He's still contributing little things here and there, all right. And some of those are like character things too, which I really like. And I think recently he said that and we talked about it on the live that he really liked Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And that he gave a lot of his approval for some of the ideas that they went with when making them have a rematch and all this other stuff, right? So yeah, like in that sense, I think he's quite happy to see that this story is like it's still going. I know he wants it to be more exploratory and creative, and I hope maybe he has a quote or something about the Acolyte and a little bit of this High Republic era because I think this would be something a little bit more in his vein of always pushing for the next thing, for the new thing when it comes to anything he's doing in filmmaking. But I think overall it is a pretty positive comment. Now the stuff about the Force and how like it's not really the same. I kind of roll my eyes a little bit because he was changing everything about Star Wars, like especially when he wasn't filming stuff. If you look at
yeah,
like a lot of the first drafts for Star Wars, we had a character called Mace Windy. Like it was like a huge super title that's like part one of Journal of the Wills and all this and that, right? The Force has changed a lot for George Lucas, and you can even look at the '80s. If we're just talking about the films, right? Late '80s, he was talking a lot about sequel films, like what could be next. But then, he's telling Mark Hamill, and Mark Hamill's recounting, like, yeah, he was saying like around like 2011, 2012, he'd be doing the sequels with me, and then he's going to
yeah,
go on to the prequels. Like, his ideas have always changed, and I don't think that's like a good or bad thing. It's just a guy who's in flux, running a company, pushing the technology of films and the ideas of filmmaking. And whenever he was thinking about Star Wars, it wasn't exactly the same thing until he was in production mode, right? And I think if anyone is like upset about like that comment and they're like, oh yeah, see that must mean the sequel's portrayal of the Force is wrong and not valid. I'm like,
right,
well, you're pushing it. I don't think that's really what he means. I just think that he's like, it's different than what I would have done, right? And it feels like it's missing some elements, but they filled it in with their own thing, right? And if you're also someone who's been enjoying Star Wars since the beginning, you'll be like, yeah, okay, well, George, you weren't always 100% on it either. At one point, it was super spiritual and very Eastern influenced, right? And then became very much about the biology of the world and a lot more about the data and the metrics of how much force potential you have. And then now you're saying the sequels are about the microbiotic world of the force. Like, the Force is whatever the plot wants it to be, and that's how you talked about it. So of course, that's how Disney's going to take it. They were a lot more conservative about the Force and the choices they made outside of the Force diet because it was very original trilogy mindset coming into the Force Awakens. But yeah, that's kind of how I view it. He's going to have his opinions, but he also knows Star Wars is much bigger than him, right? It's gone past him. He can't wrangle all of it because he never did. He was always happy with other creatives stepping in and doing their thing. So yeah, this is just someone giving his perspective. I think we have to respect it, obviously him being the maker and all, but we can also point out some things like, that doesn't exactly line up with some stuff that you said and this year, or the year after that, or the year before that. It was always changing for you too.
Yeah, I think I mean honestly, if you want to look really positively, one of the things he says is great ideas about the movies. So,
Yeah,
that might be just something he lumps in there, but he did say that. I take George Lucas is always very funny when he talks, and I appreciate all the stuff he says, but he has made a career off of trying to be the antithesis of everything that the studio system is.
yeah,
So I, you take what he says as like coming from that standpoint, right? Like he he always appreciated, I think, Disney before he sold the company because Disney was always was Disney, right? They made Disney movies. They didn't have all these different facets to them. And they become a much bigger corporation, and they're a very successful corporation. And I still really love and appreciate a lot of what they make and a lot of what they do with theme parks and the rest of it. But I think in a lot of ways, maybe George is like, now they've become the very big corporation that I didn't want to give Star Wars to, before they were this theme park driven animation studio. And
yeah,
now there's MCU, there's Lucasfilm, there's big budget, huge Disney movies, there's Disney Plus, there, Fox, all this stuff that's probably not necessarily where he was hoping for in the direction, but he is the number one shareholder of Disney, so he probably is very happy about all that
yeah.
because he's making more money. But it's probably a double-edged sword. But yeah, you got to take that point of view with a lot of what he says because he is
And
very much so that rooted in that late 60s early 70s counterculture. Screw the man, I'm going to stick it to, like,
yeah,
he talks about how Star Wars grows out of the Vietnam War, and like that is, I think, still the mindset he wants to take Star Wars from. It's like, okay, people want this, I'm going to do this instead. That's always what he's been like, and I really love and appreciate that about George Lucas because we don't have too many people who think like that anymore. People who want to do different things just because everybody else doesn't want them to do it. That's risky, and that's something you can only do when you have the money and you have the resources, have the studio. But George has always backed that, and I appreciate that about him.
yeah, and I think it's a great point that you're saying there about like the almost like inherent individuality of this guy. He's always racing. He's always trying to do something totally different. Right. And yeah, it might be a double-edged sword for selling it to Disney and then seeing how it's come out and not like always loving the direction, right? But he also let the EU kind of be its own thing until he made the Clone Wars and he was like, yeah, I'm just gonna start writing whatever. And that honestly that upset a lot of the EU fans then too, and it upset a lot of the creatives. Karen Travis, even if I don't absolutely love her writing, she made some very concrete things about like the Mando influence on the clone culture and how certain characters like aren't alive at this point or continue past. And George was like, I'm making this show and that's I have final say, right? Like he let people play in the sandbox of Star Wars for so long, and he made money off of it just like they made. Not all creators made as much as him obviously, but he was like, "Yeah, you can do whatever." And back then, people forget there were like tiers of canon. Like Leland Shee would be like, "Okay, there's T canon, there's G canon, there's B canon, all this and that." Right? Like the idea of Star Wars being this uniform, perfectly leveled thing was never been the case. So, the way he talks about Star Wars now reminds me much of like the struggles of like sometimes fitting in, like some boundaries with this guy who's never wanted to be at the boundaries. Always like I'm pushing it to the next thing. So, and
Yeah,
in some ways you can talk about the Disney sale as like, oh man, like look at what Disney's become, but you can also argue that George Lucas had created his own merchandising empire that nobody else did, and maybe that affected points of Return of the Jedi. Maybe that affected the direction of the saga as a whole for him too, because he was like, if I kill off some characters, like Han Solo wanted, Harrison Ford wanted to be in Episode 6. One thing that is talked about a lot with him and Kurtz and Kazan was that they had a lot of disagreements about the direction of Episode 6. Right, it was a little bit supposed to be more bittersweet in their minds, and then Lucas was like, "No, I want it to be more jubilant and very like powerful and happy for everybody." Right, like that. In some ways, he's been dealing with the same issue for years and years. It's just now he doesn't have as much of an active role in it.
yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, everybody, we've reached close to 2 hours. Those of you who are still left, if you are interested in hearing us go through more and more of these chats, try to get through as many as possible, we could push it for a little bit longer. Like I said, I give you guys a kind of a special edition episode before we get back to the tighter, more compact hour and a half episodes for the Acolyte. Coming next week for the next 7 weeks. But I know we have so many comments here that we haven't even come close to touching, um, that I would like to give a little bit of those comments that were especially sent in early in the stream that we never got to a chance. So we'll go through it a little bit depending on your guys' interaction, depending on the numbers of people watching and the commenting and all that. We will try to keep it going for a little bit longer here. And that takes us back to Colton Smith, who says, "It feels like it's been a while since Bad Batch, but it's only been a few weeks. Excited for more Star Wars." It does,
Yeah.
Colton, it actually does feel like it's been a while. Like, I don't know. I feel like the Bad Batch was like 2 months ago, but it was barely a month ago that ended.
I mean, it was definitely not always fun being up to watch these episodes and then coming the next day all prepared, right? And trying to think about the whole day, right? Instead of just giving our immediate thoughts, which is something I definitely love doing with these lives. But yeah, it has been a while, right? Sometimes it's nice to like de-stress a little bit. So maybe that's why I haven't thought about the Bad Batch as much. But I'm looking forward to being back in that cycle with Acolyte. And I think some of that feeling also comes with how the Bad Batch has became just about the Bad Batch by the end instead of like this transformative, like defining era defining story, right? It became a little bit more character driven. So yeah, it's like it feels like a story told a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and not like the story for. And if you're
Yeah.
attached to the characters, I think I've seen a lot on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. People are still like, "There's another Bad Batch episode this week, right, guys? We're watching another episode, right?" Like it's like yeah, if you're passionate about the characters themselves, like it's been unbearable in some ways. But if you're kind of just happy with how it ended, yeah, you don't really think about it that much. And I think that is a pretty fair way of like kind of looking at how the Bad Batch has been, slowly fading out of the Star Wars consciousness, collective consciousness.
So Travis here has a response to Chris about the TV, movie, comic, and novel pitches, and says Finn leads a team to a wreckage of Snoke's ship above Crate to pull information off the databanks, discovering it's now occupied by space savages like Thunderdome. That's an interesting pitch. I would like to see that. We talked last week about horror in Star Wars. Like, that would be very cool. That would be a cool kind of horror movie, maybe, if Snoke's ship was controlled by space savages and Finn had to leave a covert mission there. I feel like that would be a good story to take place between 8 and 9,
Yeah.
more so than post 9. But that would be cool. Cool pitch.
Yeah, I definitely love that. And I think the central figure of that is still Finn. Make this like a defining Finn story. And whatever live action version we get from him next, hopefully New Jedi Order, but whatever comes right after that, I hope it's like stuff that really fleshes out his character and his force sensitivity and what his role is within the First Order and a lot of the stormtroopers that have been left behind once that whole system collapses.
Chris says, additionally, any predictions for Rey's new Jedi Order trilogy if that happens? Well, we don't know if it's a trilogy yet. It's just a movie as of now. And I think they are hoping it's a series. I don't know if it's confirmed to be a trilogy, though. I'm hoping they go for something crazy and ambitious like the Yuzon Vong, but I have no idea. I hope they go for something crazy and ambitious like the Yuzon Vong, too. I would very much like to see either the Yuzon Vong or what Zahn has set up to kind of be the Yuzon Vong replacement. The Grisks, still don't know much about the Grisks, even with all these books. We've really only seen one of them. His name's Jixtus. But they're kind of set up to be that new threat. I would love to see something like that because this kind of extra galactic threat, that's that idea is something that's new for Star Wars movie going audiences. I think no matter what new Jedi Order, yeah, it can incorporate a lot of what made Star Wars great in the past. But I think story wise, considering one of the constant complaints about the sequels is that They either stick too closely to the tone and the feel of the original trilogy, or the same story beats. And then when they do try to get away from it, it feels weird or out of place. I think just going for something new here, just defining Ray, like you were mentioning with Finn. Like I want so many more Finn stories because he was such a promising character when he started, and we didn't get much of him later. But define these characters. Don't let the sequel trilogy be what defines these characters. Let it be the starting point for these
Yeah.
characters, and then what really defines these characters are the New Jedi Order films and everything that occurs in that time period. Because at this point, 15 years later, Ray's going to be in her late 30s, early 40s. Finn probably the same age, and Poe would be like maybe in his 50s. So you have this like, excuse me, massive jump. These things should really define who these characters are and what they've meant to the galaxy by the time of that series.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love for New Jedi Order to do something wildly ambitious. I think they are hoping that they can make it a series of movies or like its own like movie tie-ins, TV show tie-ins sort of thing, right? Where there's like almost like a when we're not filming another one in the series, we're doing a TV show with a supporting character. And
Yeah.
it's I think from what I've heard, it's not really that Ray isn't a lead character, but she is not the lead anymore, right? So it'll be very interesting on how they're going to handle some of this legacy elements, and if the real world like reception to these characters and their stories outweighs the need to just be like, oh, it's been 15 years later, there should be another generation starting to step up. I'm very curious how that'll be handled in this first film. And you've gotten some great writers included. You've got Stephen Knight picking up where totally forgetting the guy from Lost and
Damon
Watch.
Lindelof.
Yeah, Lindelof, right? His first draft, and Stephen Knight kind of took over, and he's famous for a variety of shows, especially with Peaky Blinders, right? So, yeah, I think whatever will be there will be strong. I hope it's going to be new and fresh. I would like the Grisk, but I think there is that part of me that wants Thrawn to be involved or something with Thrawn's legacy. So pushing like Empire of the Hand or something back further, maybe that would be pretty cool to like still have some legacy involved with Thrawn there. Um, yeah, I don't know if I necessarily want the Vong exactly though. Like I like them for what they are in the books and all that, but the books are almost like pushing rated R quite often and almost like a little too extreme
Hmm.
what's going on in the story with the like the amount of deaths and everything. I think whatever is going to happen here is never going to reach that like almost devastating level, right? What's interesting is who lives and who's been subjugated, and these little battles that change the state of the galaxy, as opposed to like, hey, everything was great for 30 years and then faltered, and then you got this solidly on track in 15 years, and now something's just wiped out 80% of life in the galaxy. I don't know if I want that level, right? But I think you can do some really unique things. Just to, like avoid too much of the classic way of dealing with the Imperials and First Order. You're gonna if you're gonna have them be players, maybe go more late EU, like the Fell Empire, or more of like the Reformed Imperial remnants that kind of becomes a bit more of a faction during the one Sith War and all that, right? More of that if you're gonna have to bring some legacy elements and groups. But again, how much is Ray at the center of the story? I think really does define the scope of the story.
And I think, to be honest, that's kind of disappointing if they move on from these characters, because instead of trying to make them better, we just kind of accepted public opinion. Like a lot of these characters aren't inherently awful. There's good elements about all three of them, and things that are interesting about all three of them that you can definitely play with. Maybe Poe the least, because he is the most carbon copy of like other characters we've seen, but Finn and Rey have elements. We just haven't seen that developed, and so it'd be kind of disappointing to move on from them. And I know we had the story today. I was going to bring this story up if we were looking for things to talk about, where Daisy Ridley said that she hasn't even read a script for the New Jedi Order yet, which is also kind of concerning because they're on their second writer, and she's not thinking about Lindelof's script, but she signed on originally with Lindelof, and now he's gone, and then now they're on a second writer who's also supposed to be moving on to new stuff soon. So it is concerning that this project feels like it's caught in this like typical Lucasfilm web of like, oh, all these things that, nothing's getting finalized. Um, and it sucks because I really want, I feel for Daisy Ridley, I feel for these characters, and I feel for the sequels, and I want these things to be great, but unfortunately, or fortunately, they aren't fast tracking this to the point where like we just need to make it. Who cares? I think they'll get the story right. I think they've learned from that, but it is kind of concerning that they announced this almost 2 years ago, and the main star hasn't seen a script. Um, so we'll see. But yeah, we talk. That one seems to come up every week too. The new Jedi Order. Okay, so a couple more, and then we're gonna wrap it up here. I want to get to where we kind of first lost connection, and then because that's when we really went into that discussion about the fan base and stuff. So we have Travis who says, "I've heard people speculate most of these characters die in the first episode of the Acolyte. Do you think they'll go that way?" That's an interesting question. I don't think they kill off most of the characters in the first episode because, most of the cast they've been promoting would all be, you know, not even needed to promote. There's also some really famous and big actors and people that just seem like they should be a part of the legacy of the show. Would I like to see some character deaths in the first episode? Yes, I'm a big character death guy. Like I think that's one of the best ways to show you mean business when you're working on something is to kill somebody off in the story. Um, but it can't be for no reason, right? It's like, let's make them impactful. Don't just do it for shock value. But that would be kind of insane if they did that. And I would be very interested to see what the next 7 episodes were like if they did that in the first episode.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna kill off everyone, but I think it's important to note that they got a big actress in Carrie Ann Moss, and I know maybe she's not super well known as like her late '90s and early 2000s peak, but she's had a really strong career. She's got a very notable role in Jessica Jones, and she's been in very dramatic roles since The Matrix as well. So this kind of being more
So
riffing on that the '90s legacy, I think would be. Is our sound off again? Uh,
I don't think so.
Did you say something? Uh,
No, I didn't. I said I don't think their sounds off.
okay, sorry. I thought I heard sound was off. My mistake there. Yeah. So I think her being a '90s legend of sorts, and them basically being like, let's have Trinity play a Star Wars character with a lightsaber. I think they're setting her up to be the one that might die in that first episode because she's been really pushed to the forefront of marketing. But there are other choices. Like there's been that character of Master Torben, right? He's fighting Kelnock at some point, right? And we're getting flashbacks of him. But maybe we start off with his death, right? Because it does seem like he's older and he dies in the current timeline. And then maybe we start seeing most of the deaths happen in the first 2 episodes, and then take a bit of a break as the investigation goes on. And then that Sith like figure with the mask then decides to chop down everybody else more in like 6 or 7, right? Maybe that could be where it really takes most of the deaths in the story, but having it all in that first episode, I don't know. I think then you start making like the Jedi weaker and like not worthwhile to be invested in, right? If you take one or two that are like supposed to be stalwarts and then they're gone, and how everyone has to like step in place, that leads to a really creative story. But if you're just saying like, oh, suddenly May is just super powered, then you're losing some of that dramatic tension. Plus, you might even get some of like the more negative sides of fandom being like, "Oh, I hate May. How is she taking down all these Jedi and all that?" I don't. I think in this day and age, you have to be a little cognizant of like not making your characters overpowered either, right? Especially with like the reception to Rey, even though I don't think she's a Mary Sue. I can't say there aren't some conveniences to her character that people definitely have still been harping on, even in 2024, 9 years removed from The Force Awakens.
Travis asks a really interesting question here, and I think this one is fun to think about. He says, "What's something in the original trilogy you think would be criticized if the internet had been around back in the 70s and 80s?" Oh man. Well, what would it be? But I mean, I think so. I think one of the interesting things, right, when you look at it, would be obviously people's expectations and the thought around Star Wars would be different. It would be still similar to what it was in the 70s and 80s because there would be no Star Wars, right? So if we're taking it from that standpoint, if you want to say the prequels came out first and then we got the OT around the internet age, okay, then we can have that conversation too. But if we're saying that Star Wars still starts with the original trilogy, I think that there still wouldn't be as crazy of a criticism because there would be no expectations. I think where you'd start to get criticism would be Empire and Return of the Jedi. I think Empire would hold up pretty well. It was criticized back then for being too dark, too, not really the same tone as A New Hope. So I think you could see that criticism reappear. But I think Return of the Jedi would be the one that would get the most criticism. I think people would not like the Ewoks. You'd have, I mean, I think it's still the same stuff that people still criticize the movies for. I just think it would be louder instead of people being like, maybe 20% of the people being like, I don't like the Ewoks and the way they beat the Empire. You'd have 50% of the people saying, I hate the Ewoks. Wicket is the worst character that ever existed. And they, ruined my life and I hate them so much. That would be kind of what you would see now versus back then.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a question of like what sort of internet we're dealing with. Like, if we're saying like the start of the internet as we know it was like maybe just 10 years earlier, and we're just in the earliest, most primitive version, like it kind of was there, like with DARPANET and everything, but maybe just pushed ahead in its timeline a couple years earlier. I don't think we're gonna get that same level of criticism, right? I think I wouldn't be surprised if there was a similar reception to the Empire initially, the same way there was to The Last Jedi, where like there are different camps of people, but I don't think they would ever be to that same like extreme. And I think a lot of the camps around The Last Jedi solidified because The Rise of Skywalker was a pretty reactionary film. There were a lot of changes, a lot of things to Rey's arc, right, that don't really line up. Like, yes, I can see the explanations away. I can see stuff filling it in and making it stronger, but it's not like 7 to 8 with Rey being someone to being Rey nobody to then being Rey Palpatine was a linear line of thought. It wasn't, right? So I think that's where a lot of the internet criticisms of The Last Jedi really became permanent is because of how The Rise of Skywalker handled it, and then added in a bunch of other crazy things to, now deal with and complain about or love, right? So I don't think we'd have that same issue for too long with Empire, but I still think people would be more generous to this film, and it would, like we've seen now, it's aged super well. So maybe not to the same extreme as we see today of it being like considered a masterpiece sequel, one of the best sequels of all time. But I can still see it be like considered like one of the all-time movies of the 80s at least, right?
Yeah.
Return of the Jedi, I think, would be the one. Like you said, Liam, it would get criticized to no end, and I don't think it's totally unwarranted. I think a lot of people would have wanted, not in the sense of like, oh man, like it's just super happy and a great ending. I don't think people would complain about that, especially because it's still Lucas at the helm. It's not like The Rise of Skywalker, where it is almost a reactionary film. But I think they would criticize, like, "Hey, why didn't you kill off Han? Like, why aren't we getting the Wookiees like you first were talking about?" I think the nature of how the internet would have evolved over time and discussions online, media would have taken a little bit more notice of that. People would have picked up on more of these tidbits around production, which was not super well hidden back in the day. It's really become a thing more with these Disney Star Wars films. Even the prequels, we had so much content of. I can only imagine people who are in the area or heard something happening in the Redwood Forest saw this and they're like, "Oh my god, I heard there's Wookiees," and then someone like puts up a picture online. They're like, "What? What are these little things? These aren't Wookiees." Like, I could totally see people get upset about stuff like that. Um, I think people have always criticized Luke and Leia being brother and sister, especially after their kiss, and I think that would have been way more talked about if the internet around were for episode 6. That could have been something that would have irked more and more people, especially because there were always rumors of like Luke's real sister being found, in episode 7 and 8 and 9 in the original ideas. But yeah, I don't know. I think it would really just be 6 that takes the brunt of it, regardless of how advanced the internet is, because there are things that we talk about today, and still many people love this film for. I think it would only just be slightly more negative. I think the structural things that are there with the sequels, that are there with the prequels, that is what causes the source of this frustration and discussion to first appear online. The original trilogy, it's really just 6 that feels like it's making things a little too rushed and convenient of a closed ending.
I think those are all really good points. And the last thing I'm going to get into here for you all, just because I told Colton we'd get back to it, is the Furiosa comment. This will be the last comment. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll not go into spoilers about Furiosa because obviously this is not a Mad Max channel, and a lot of people didn't get out to see it. Colton says, unrelated to Star Wars, curious if y'all seen Furiosa yet. I thought it was a great prequel. Unfortunately, seems to be bombing at the box office. Weird times for movies. Yeah, this has been one of the weirdest starts to a summer ever. And it's crazy because these movies that have come out have all been really good for the most part. Like Planet of the Apes was very, very good.
Yeah.
Furiosa is excellent. And unfortunately, nobody's going to see these movies. And I thought I didn't think Furiosa would be a massive hit, but I thought it could definitely reach that barometer right now for what a movie opening is a success, what makes a movie opening a success, which is about the 45 to $60 million range on opening weekend. And considering how many awards Mad Max Fury Road got, considering how much word of mouth played into that movie after it came out, because it didn't succeed that well at the box office, especially for 2015. It wasn't a massive hit, but with how much people love Fury Road, myself included, um, I thought Furiosa would do a lot better. I did always think it was a little bit of a mistake to do Furiosa first before you did another Mad Max movie, just because the name Mad Max is so iconic. Whereas Furiosa, you only know if you've seen the movie. Um, but it is a great movie. I thought it was excellent. I really want to see it again because it is very different than I thought it would be, which was very much so a positive and something that, like, at first I was kind of like trying to figure out what frame of mind to watch this movie in, and because Fury Road is such an adrenaline rush, right? It's one of the most perfectly paced movies I've ever seen. Its action is like flawless, and in the way it's structured it with its pace. And Furiosa is much more of a character story. Do think it's a little long. Other than that, I've basically no criticism. Like, it is a great movie. Definitely go out and see it if you guys are watching this and haven't seen it. It is so worth your time. And if you haven't seen Mad Max Fury Road for some reason, you don't need to have seen the first 3 Mad Max movies. And it is, in my opinion, an absolute masterpiece, Mad Max Fury Road. And I think Furiosa does a great job of following it up and being a great prequel. It's awesome. And I really hope The Wasteland gets made, his next Mad Max movie.
Yes, please.
It says, like, things are saying it's in production. So if it's in production, they're not going to just cut it. But I don't know how accurate that is. If it's in pre-production, it might get cut. If it's in post-production, I mean, in actual production, it's going to get made. But God, yeah, it deserves to come out because these movies are excellent. George Miller is brilliant, and he is definitely getting up there in age. These might be his last movies, so I would
Yeah.
love to see him finish out this like reboot trilogy to Mad Max, because Furiosa definitely deserves more people watching it than have gone to see it.
Yeah, throw a bone to him, man. Like, if this is like the last statement for Mad Max, I'm sure Furiosa. I haven't seen it. I spent the last like 2 weeks catching up on the reboot, sort of, Kingdom of the Apes. I finally watched that Kingdom of
Oh,
Planet of the Apes in theater, so I haven't updated my letterbox, unfortunately. But I saw all those movies from Rise to Dawn to War and Kingdom, right? And fantastic series. I want to get into Mad Max. I'm planning on watching the first ones, and I've been watching some of the timeline videos on how Fury Road is like reboot, but then it's like a continuation, all that. But like,
yeah,
yeah, like make Wasteland happen. Throw him a bone. We've seen other great actors and directors get second chances on their passion projects, right? And especially with like a lot of like the issues around Fury Road, like he made it under budget and on time, and he was supposed to get more money off it, and the studios were like, nope, we're just gonna not do that to you. So that also prolonged how long it took for Furiosa to come out, right? Like this
Yeah.
guy deserves to get one last statement with like a full Mad Max story. Yes, Furiosa is probably a really great film. I'm looking forward to watching it, but it is sourced from a lot of what Fury Road is. Its lore and plot is about, right? Let the Wasteland Baby be like a great final send off. If you want, maybe even make your like final scene after bringing back Tom Hardy, right? Make your final scene be Mel Gibson at the
Yeah.
very end of the Mad Max days. Force those two timelines together finally. And I've been watching a lot of strange videos about like, does this make sense anymore? Like, should we just think of it thematically as like just like an archetype of a wandering hero in the desert and all that? Like, yeah, I mean, it sucks. It sucks that Furiosa has been bombing, and hopefully does well on Max, and makes up a little bit of that budget. But yeah, when something this creative and zany and important to the cultural zeitgeist eventually, right? Like especially Mad Max, 2, that became such an iconic film that people were like referencing it in their own shows and movies and all that. Like it's gonna happen with Furiosa. It's already happening with Fury Road. Like I think when you have that lasting legacy in the culture of what we think of pop culture, right? And that in the the aesthetics and the storytelling, you got to give the guy one last chance to just like end it, right? This is not how you end a series in my mind. It might be a great film, but let him have a conclusion. And I think the fact that he already had the ideas for Wasteland and Furiosa is done before Fury Road even got into production, like fully written and scripted out. I think that only means that once he gets the green light, everyone's going to be going full balls to the wall. Just be like, all right, this is it. This is truly might be the last thing from Mad Max. Let's make it a truly special send off.
Absolutely. They need to do it. I mean, I think, if you want to be the optimistic standpoint in the studio, if you want to be the guy on the board that's like the optimist, you can be like, well, Furiosa, it's not called Mad Max. Maybe the Wasteland will do great. I don't think it's going to do great. None of the Mad Max movies have been huge box office successes, but it would be awesome to let an Academy Award nominated director like George Miller. Personally, I always felt like he should have won that Oscar in 2015. It's so difficult to direct action,
He
and
got it
to have something.
for that animated film though, right? For Happy Feet or that
Yeah,
yeah. So he's got
yeah.
the credentials.
Yeah, he's had one of the strangest filmographies. He directed Babe, Pig in the City. He did
Yeah.
Happy Feet 1 and 2, and he's also done all the 5 Mad Max movies. So he's very versatile. But yeah, he deserved it that year, in all honesty. It's so difficult to direct action. It's so difficult to innovate action and not just innovate it in like, oh, this person shot somebody in a cool way. It's the way they shoot these movies is unreal, especially for the budget and especially how much they get in camera and don't shoot on a sound stage or with CGI. It's unbelievable. And so if you're somebody who's an action purist or just somebody who really loves adrenaline or action movies, the first one even has a lot of thriller elements. It is very much so a race against the clock type movie, very tight. Um, Check it out. It will have you on the edge of your seat, and it's weird enough and different enough lore that I think like fans of our channel, people like Star Wars, people like lore, you probably would like it because Fury Road is so good, and it's one of the great action movies of all time. And I think Furiosa, I love how different Furiosa is. It doesn't try to be a Fury Road, but with Furiosa as the main character, it tries to be something so much more character driven than Mad Max has been in a long time, really since maybe the original. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it. Can't wait to see it again. And I hope that we get that finale. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for our stream. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you're watching on replay, make sure you drop your comments about anything you saw us discuss here in the stream down below. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this whole last, 3-4 weeks of these news streams before we go back to a Star Wars series. Yes, next week, next Tuesday night, we will be getting the first 2 episodes of the Acolyte dropped on Disney Plus. They are supposed to release at 6 p.m. Pacific time, which means we will watch them and then immediately go live. Right now, for everybody, keep an eye out. We will post what time we'll go live based on when the episode or how long the episodes are. Maybe we'll find that information out sometime this week before the episodes drop, because so many people have already seen them. It would make sense for them to kind of release that information. But the rumor before was these were all under 40-minute episodes. So we'll see if that is the case. We might be starting around 7:15-ish Pacific. If not, 7:30-ish probably be the latest we'd start for the Acolyte coverage. We will still be accepting, live Q&A and thoughts like this. So if you guys come and have questions about anything related to Star Wars, come join us, send those questions in. We will talk about anything you want to discuss, but the Acolyte will be the main focus of the show. And we'll probably dominate the discussion of the show. So join us for those, and we will be doing it every single Tuesday night for the rest of the series. As far as we know, this is the only double episode week for the Acolyte, unless they announce differently in the future. So should be about 7 weeks long, our coverage, and we're looking forward to having you all a part of it. Make sure you like this video if you haven't. Comment below your thoughts. If you're watching on replay, subscribe to the channel and join us every single week, because we do this every week no matter what. Hopefully you've all enjoyed these last few streams. Check out all the new videos and shorts and polls and everything on the channel. So much stuff going up on the channel right now, and we will be starting to get into that flow of Acolyte videos coming out. We'll be restarting predictions and speculations for Acolyte and all that stuff. So keep an eye out on the channel for all that great stuff. Thank you so much for watching this big supersized stream this week, everybody, and we'll see you all next time. Good night.